The Wyoming wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain across the Maddox ranch, 1,500 acres of high country where the earth met sky in a clean, unbroken line. James Maddox stood at the rifle range he'd built 40 years ago, watching his grandson settle into position behind the weathered shooting bench. The boy moved with the careful precision of youth trying to prove itself, elbows planted firm, cheek pressed to the stock, breathing measured and deliberate. 71 years had carved deep lines into Hawk's face, but his eyes remained sharp as the day he'd first looked through a scope in another life, another world. The tremor in his hands came and went now, a reminder that time spared no one, not even ghosts. He'd hidden the diagnosis from Tyler for 6 months. Stage 3. The doctors gave him a year, maybe less. But today, under this wide Montana sky, with his grandson's finger resting gentle on the trigger, James Maddox felt something close to peace. The target stood 800 yards downrange, a simple steel silhouette shimmering in the afternoon heat. Most men couldn't make that shot with perfect conditions and a lifetime of practice. Tyler had been shooting for 3 years. "Go ahead, son," Hawk said, his voice carrying that prairie gravel that came from decades of silence and dust. "Show me what you learned." Tyler's finger tightened. The rifle cracked sharp and clean, the sound rolling across the valley like distant thunder. 3 seconds later, the metallic ping echoed back, dead center. Hawk nodded slowly, pride and something darker moving through his chest. The boy had the gift. The same gift that had made James Maddox a legend in circles that didn't officially exist, in wars that were never declared, in missions that had no names and left no records. The same gift that had gotten good men killed and bad men rich. "That's good shooting," Hawk said quietly. "Your daddy would have been proud." Tyler lowered the rifle, turning to look at his grandfather with those clear blue eyes that belonged to Sarah Maddox, the son Hawk had lost 15 years ago. "Do you think Dad was as good as you?" The question hung in the air between them. Hawk felt the familiar weight settle across his shoulders, the weight of secrets and half-truths and the lies we tell to protect the ones we love. "Your daddy was the best shot I ever trained," Hawk said after a long pause. "But some things, a man's better off not knowing." "What do you mean?" "Nothing, son, just old man talk." He turned away, coughing once, tasting copper at the back of his throat. The cough had been getting worse. "Now show me that 1,000-yard target. Let's see if you can read this wind." Tyler chambered another round, settling back into position, and Hawk watched him with the eyes of a teacher and the heart of a man running out of time. The wind shifted, carrying with it the whisper of memories 4 decades old. Benghazi, the taste of sand and blood, the sound of gunfire in a concrete room, the faces of men who trusted him, believed in him, died because of him. He pushed the memories down deep, the way he'd learned to do in the years after, when the nightmares came every night, and the bottle was the only thing that kept the ghosts at bay. Tyler didn't need to know about any of that. Tyler would go to college, study forestry like he planned, live a clean life with clean hands. The sins of the grandfather would end with the grandfather. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. The second shot rang out, another perfect strike. Tyler was grinning now, the kind of pure joy that belonged to young men who still believed the world made sense, who hadn't yet learned that sometimes the monsters win and the heroes die, and the truth stays buried for 40 years. Hawk smiled back, feeling the cancer eating at his insides, feeling the weight of the box in the barn that he should have burned years ago, feeling the approach of something he'd always known would come eventually. The past never stayed buried. Not really. It just waited. They packed up the rifles as the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. The light turned everything gold and amber, painting the ranch in colors that belonged in old photographs, in memories of better days. Tyler carried the cases to the truck while Hawk locked up the ammunition locker, his fingers moving through the combination from muscle memory alone. As he turned to follow his grandson, movement caught his eye. There, at the edge of the property where the dirt road met the county highway, a black SUV sat idling. Too new, too clean, too out of place in this country where pickups ruled and sedans meant city folk who'd lost their way. Hawk felt his pulse quicken, felt 40 years fall away in an instant. His hand moved instinctively to his hip, where a sidearm used to ride. Nothing there now but an empty belt and old habits that died hard. The SUV's windows were tinted dark. He couldn't see who sat inside, but he didn't need to. After 4 decades, a man developed instincts about these things, about when the past finally caught up. He climbed into the truck beside Tyler, saying nothing about the vehicle, and they drove back to the main house in comfortable silence. The ranch house had been built by Hawk's father in 1952, solid timber and stone that had weathered every storm Wyoming could throw at it. Sarah had grown up here, learning to ride and rope and shoot before he could write his name. Now Sarah was 15 years in the ground, and Tyler lived here with his grandfather, the two of them rattling around in too much space, 2 generations of Maddox men trying to outrun ghosts. That night they ate dinner at the old pine table that Sarah had carved his initials into when he was 7. Hawk had never sanded them out. Tyler talked about his classes, about the girl he'd met at the feed store, about plans for hunting season. Hawk listened and nodded and tried not to think about the black SUV or the way his hands shook when he reached for his water glass. After dinner, Tyler cleared the plates while Hawk stepped out onto the porch, the way he did most evenings, watching the stars emerge one by one across the massive sky. The air had that clean, high country bite that promised frost by morning. Somewhere out in the darkness, a coyote called, lonely and insistent. "Happy birthday, son." Hawk turned. Tyler stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the kitchen, looking so much like Sarah at that age that it made Hawk's chest tight. "I didn't think you remembered," Tyler said. A man doesn't forget when his grandson turns 21. Hawk reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a worn envelope. "Your daddy left this for you. Told me to give it to you when you were man enough to handle it." Tyler took the envelope slowly, turning it over in his hands. It was sealed with wax, old-fashioned, the way Sarah had always done things. His name was written across the front in his father's neat script. "When did he give you this?" "Week before he died." The words hung heavy between them. 15 years, and neither of them had really talked about it. The official story was a car accident, black ice on Highway 14, a young man driving too fast on a winter night, the closed casket funeral, the condolences that felt hollow and scripted, the insurance payout that had saved the ranch but couldn't fill the hole in their lives. Tyler's hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded 3 times. He unfolded it slowly, and Hawk watched his grandson's face change as he read. Watched the color drain. Watched the boy's jaw tighten. Watched 21 years of innocence burn away in the space of 300 words. When Tyler looked up, his eyes held something Hawk had hoped never to see there. The knowledge that the world was darker than you'd been told, that the people you trusted kept secrets, that sometimes the monsters were real. "What is this?" Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. Hawk said nothing. There was nothing to say, not yet. Tyler read aloud, his voice gaining strength and anger with each word. "Tyler, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and it wasn't an accident. Grandpa knows the truth. Ask him about Phantom Eagle. Ask him what happened in Benghazi, 1982. Ask him who really killed your grandmother. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, but you deserve the truth." Tyler's hands were shaking now. What the hell is this? What is Phantom Eagle? What happened in Benghazi? Sit down, Tyler. No, tell me right now, what did Dad mean? Hawk moved to the porch railing, gripping it hard enough that his knuckles went white. The wood was smooth and worn from years of hands seeking stability, seeking something solid in a world that shifted and broke and betrayed. Beyond the circle of porch light, the Wyoming darkness stretched vast and complete. Your daddy died in a car crash, Hawk said, his voice flat and hard. That's all you need to know. He says you're lying. Sometimes lies protect better than truth. Tyler was on his feet now, the letter crumpled in his fist. That's not good enough. Not anymore. If my father was murdered, I deserve to know why. I deserve to know what you did. The accusation hit Hawk like a physical blow. What I did. As if it were that simple. As if 40 years of guilt and nightmares and the faces of dead men could be summarized in 3 words. What I did. You should go to bed, Hawk said quietly. We'll talk in the morning. No, we'll talk now. Boy, you don't want to go down this road. Tyler's laugh was bitter, angry, nothing like the sound of joy from the rifle range just hours before. I don't have a choice, do I? Dad made sure of that. He knew you'd never tell me, so he left me this. His last words, telling me my grandfather is a liar. The words cut deep because they were true. Hawk had lied. Had been lying for 15 years, for 40 years, had built an entire life on a foundation of carefully constructed untruths. Told himself it was for Tyler's protection. Told himself it was better this way. Told himself so many things in the dark hours before dawn when the ghosts came calling. I need some air, Hawk said, and walked past his grandson, down the porch steps, out into the darkness where the weight of the sky pressed down, and a man could breathe without feeling like he was drowning in the past. Behind him, he heard Tyler call out, heard the anger and confusion and betrayal in that young voice. But Hawk kept walking, past the barn, past the equipment shed, to the old oak tree where he'd buried the box 40 years ago, where he'd sworn he'd never dig it up, where the last pieces of James Maddox, the man he used to be, lay waiting in the dark earth. He stood there for a long time, remembering. Remembering the heat of North Africa, remembering the weight of a rifle in his hands and the trust in the eyes of men who called him brother, remembering the moment everything went wrong, remembering the sound of gunfire in a concrete room and the choices that haunt a man until his dying day. He was still standing there when he heard the vehicle. The engine sound was wrong, too smooth, too quiet, not the rumble of a ranch truck or the rattle of a neighbor's sedan. This was something else, something that didn't belong. Hawk turned slowly, his old instincts coming alive, his body remembering things his mind had tried to forget. The black SUV from earlier rolled up the long driveway, headlights cutting through the darkness, moving with the careful confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going. It stopped 30 feet away. The engine died. The headlights stayed on, pinning Hawk in their glare like a prisoner in a spotlight. He raised a hand to shield his eyes, his heart hammering in his chest, tasting metal and fear and something that felt almost like relief. Finally, after all these years, finally. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, moving with the ease of someone comfortable with violence, someone who'd walked into dangerous situations and walked back out. He was dressed in an expensive suit, gray with thin pinstripes, completely out of place in the Wyoming night. But his face belonged to memories Hawk had spent 4 decades trying to forget. Robert Kane looked good for 68. The years had been kind to him in the way they're kind to men who sleep soundly, who don't carry the weight of dead friends, who turned betrayal into a billion-dollar empire. His hair was silver, perfectly cut. His face was tanned and healthy. His eyes were the same cold blue they'd been in 1982, the eyes of a man who could pull a trigger and order dinner in the same breath. "Hello, Hawk," Kane said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "It's been 42 years. Hawk felt for the gun that wasn't there, felt his age and his sickness and his helplessness. "You're not welcome here, Reaper." The old code name hung in the air between them. Reaper. The name Kane had earned in a dozen countries, in 100 kills, in the shadows where nations played their games and men like James Maddox did the bloody work that kept the machine running. "I'm not here to fight, old friend," Kane said, moving closer with that predator's grace that some men never lose. "I'm here to remind you. Some secrets are better buried." Hawk's hands curled into fists. His breath came short and hard. The cancer pain flared in his gut, but he ignored it, focused everything on the man walking toward him. The man who'd killed his team, killed his friends, built an empire on blood and gold and lies. "I see the boys groan," Kane continued, glancing toward the house where light spilled from the kitchen window. "Looks just like Sarah, doesn't he? Your son had his mother's eyes. Such a tragedy, that accident." The threat was clear, unmistakable. "Leave my grandson out of this." "That depends on you," Kane said, stopping just out of reach. "The files are resurfacing, Hawk. Someone's been digging. Anonymous hackers, leaked documents, all that modern convenience. Our little operation in Benghazi is attracting attention again. If it's not you doing the digging, then it's him." "It's not me," Hawk said through gritted teeth. "Then convince your grandson to stop asking questions." Kane pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket, tossed it on the ground between them. "Because if the truth comes out, a lot of people will be very unhappy. And you know what happens when powerful people become unhappy." Hawk looked down at the photograph. It showed 5 men in desert camouflage standing in front of a concrete building, somewhere hot and dusty and far from home. They looked young and hard and confident, the way men look before the world teaches them otherwise. He recognized every face: Falcon, Condor, Vulture, Raven, and himself, James Maddox, code name Hawk, the spotter who'd become a coward. 4 of those faces had red X marks slashed across them. Only Hawk's remained unmarked. "I couldn't pull the trigger in '82, Kane said softly, "and you can't pull it now. You're not a killer, Hawk. You never were. That's why you ran. That's why you lived. That's why your team died while you hid in the shadows." The words hit like bullets, each one finding its mark, each one true enough to draw blood. Hawk had run, had hidden, had let better men die while he saved his own skin, had spent 40 years telling himself it was survival, knowing deep down it was cowardice. Kane turned to leave, then paused. 48 hours, Hawk. Make sure your grandson understands. Some questions don't have good answers. Some doors should stay closed." The SUV's engine purred to life. Kane climbed inside without looking back, and the vehicle rolled away down the long driveway, taillights fading into the Wyoming night like dying embers. Hawk stood alone under the oak tree, the photograph at his feet, his hands shaking with rage and fear and the terrible knowledge that the past had finally come calling, and this time there was nowhere left to run. He bent slowly, every movement sending fresh pain through his diseased body, and picked up the photograph, turned it over. On the back, written in Kane's neat script, "Phantom Eagle, 5 men in, 1 man out. Ask your grandpa which bodies he stepped over to survive." The words blurred as Hawk's eyes filled with tears he'd refused to shed for 40 years. He clutched the photograph to his chest, feeling the weight of all those deaths, all those betrayals, all those long nights when he'd woken screaming and reached for the bottle because it was the only thing that made the voices stop. "Grandpa." Hawk turned. Tyler stood at the edge of the porch light, the letter still in his hand, his face pale and drawn. Who was that? An old friend. That's a lie. Tyler's voice was steady now, certain. You don't have old friends, you have ghosts. The accusation hung between them, true and cutting. Hawk wanted to deny it, wanted to spin another story, another comfortable lie. But the letter had changed everything. Sarah had made sure of that, had left his son a truth that couldn't be buried, couldn't be forgotten, couldn't be explained away with old man platitudes and careful misdirection. We need to talk, Hawk said quietly. Yeah, Tyler said, we do. They walked back to the house together, grandfather and grandson, separated by 50 years and a lifetime of secrets. Inside, Hawk made coffee with hands that trembled, buying time, trying to find words for things that had no words. Tyler sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of him, waiting with the patience of youth that knows it holds all the cards. Hawk set down 2 mugs, sat across from his grandson and began to speak. The words came slowly at first, rusty from decades of disuse, then faster like a dam breaking, like a confession that had been building for 40 years and could no longer be contained. 1978, he began. I was 25 years old. I'd done 2 tours in the Army, good conduct discharge, came back to the ranch, thought I'd live quiet, raise cattle, maybe get married. Then a man came to see me, government man, said they needed someone with my skills, said it was important work, said I'd be helping my country. Tyler listened without speaking, his face unreadable in the dim kitchen light. They called it Phantom Eagle, 5 men, deep black operations. We didn't exist on paper. No records, no files, no official acknowledgement. We went where regular military couldn't go. Did things regular military couldn't do. Took out targets that threatened American interests. Drug lords, warlords, arms dealers. The kind of men the world's better off without. Who were the others? Hawk closed his eyes, seeing their faces as clearly as if 40 years had never passed. Marcus Hayes, codename Falcon, best natural shot I ever saw. David Chen, codename Condor, he could move through any terrain like a ghost. Antonio Ruiz, codename Vulture, explosives expert, could make a bomb from a matchbook and some wire. Thomas Blake, codename Raven, communications and intel. And Robert Kane, codename Reaper, our team leader. The man who was just here. Yes. And what happened in Benghazi? Hawk's hands wrapped around the coffee mug, seeking warmth, seeking something to anchor him as the memories rose like flood water. 1982. We got a mission. High-value target in Libya. A warlord who called himself the Scorpion. Intelligence said he'd stolen 50 million in gold bullion from Gaddafi's reserves. Our job was to eliminate him, recover the gold for our government. He paused, drinking cold coffee, tasting the past. We inserted clean, no complications, located the target, located the gold. Everything was going according to plan. Then Kane called a team meeting, said he'd been approached by the Scorpion, said the warlord wanted to make a deal. We could take the gold, split it 5 ways, disappear. No one would know. Tyler leaned forward. What did you do? Falcon said no, said it was treason. Condor agreed, said we took an oath. Vulture and Raven, they were tempted. 50 million is a lot of money. 10 million each. Enough to disappear forever, live like kings. And you? I abstained, Hawk said, the shame of it burning in his throat even after all these years. I didn't vote. Told myself I was being neutral. Truth was, I was a coward. Didn't have the guts to stand with Falcon and Condor, didn't have the greed to side with the others. So I said nothing. What happened next? Hawk set down the mug. His hands were shaking badly now. The next night Kane called another meeting. Said we needed to talk it through, make a final decision. We all gathered in the safe house, old concrete building on the edge of Benghazi. I was on the roof, overwatch position. That was my job. I was the spotter, not the shooter. My job was to watch, to warn, to keep the team safe. He stopped, the memory overwhelming him. The heat of that North African night, the smell of dust and diesel, the weight of the rifle in his hands, the moment when everything went wrong. Through my scope, I saw Kane pull his sidearm, saw him put it to the back of Falcon's head, heard the shot even through the concrete. Then Raven and Vulture started shooting. Condor fought back, but 3 against 1. It was over in seconds. Tyler's face had gone white. Your team killed each other. Kane killed them, Hawk corrected. Kane and the ones who chose gold over honor. And I watched it happen, through my scope. Had Kane in my sights, could have taken the shot, could have saved them. Why didn't you? The question Hawk had asked himself every day for 40 years. Why didn't you? Why didn't you pull the trigger? Why did you run? Why did you let them die? Because I was afraid, Hawk said simply. I was 29 years old and I was terrified. 3 trained killers down there and me alone on a rooftop with a rifle I'd never fired in anger. I told myself I'd miss. Told myself I'd just get myself killed too. Told myself a lot of things. He met Tyler's eyes. Truth is, I was a coward. I ran. Left my team dead in that concrete tomb. Disappeared into the Benghazi night. Made my way to the coast. Caught a fishing boat to Malta. From there back to the States. The CIA declared me KIA. Declared the whole team KIA. Closed the file. I never corrected them. Came back here. Changed my name legally. Became James Maddox instead of James Mallory. Started over. And Kane. Kane took the gold. Him and Raven and Vulture. Split it 3 ways. Then over the next 2 years, Raven died in a hunting accident. Vulture died by suicide. Convenient accidents for a man who wanted 50 million all to himself. Tyler stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. And Dad? What about Dad? The letter says you know who killed him. Hawk felt the tears come again, hot and shameful. Your daddy was smart, too smart. Went into the army, became a ranger, served with honor. When he came home, he started asking questions. Found some old files I'd hidden. Figured out who I really was. Started digging into Phantom Eagle, into Benghazi, into what really happened. He paused, his voice breaking. 2 weeks before he died, he came to me, said he'd found proof. Said Kane was still alive, living under his real name, running a military contracting company worth billions. Said he was going to expose everything. I begged him to stop. Told him it was too dangerous. Told him Kane had killed better men for less. But your daddy, he had principles, had honor. Said the truth mattered. The car accident, Tyler said flatly. Wasn't an accident, Hawk confirmed. Kane's people ran him off the road, made it look like ice and bad luck. I knew, but I had no proof. And if I spoke up, Kane would come for you next. So I stayed quiet, kept you safe, kept you ignorant, kept you alive. The silence that followed was heavy and complete. Tyler stared at his grandfather, this man he'd known his entire life, seeing him clearly for the first time. Seeing the coward who'd run. Seeing the liar who'd hidden. Seeing the broken man who'd let his son die rather than face his past. You let my father die, Tyler said, his voice barely a whisper. You let him die to save yourself. To save you, Hawk corrected desperately. If I'd spoken up, you'd be dead too. That's what you tell yourself, Tyler said, and the contempt in his voice was worse than any blow. That's the lie you use to sleep at night. But the truth is, you're still running, still hiding, still the same coward who watched his friends die and did nothing. Tyler turned and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the old floorboards. Hawk heard the front door slam, heard the truck engine start, heard his grandson drive away into the night, and felt the last piece of his heart break cleanly in 2. He sat alone at the kitchen table as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, and the ghosts gathered close. The photograph lay in front of him, those young faces staring up with the confidence of men who didn't know they'd be dead within a week. Dead because of gold, dead because of greed, dead because one of them had run instead of fight. Hawk picked up his phone with shaking hands, dialed a number he'd memorized 40 years ago but never called. It rang 3 times, 4, 5. Then a voice answered, rough with age and distance. "This is a surprise." "They know," Hawk said. "The files are leaking. Kane was here." The voice on the other end was silent for a long moment. Then, "How much does the boy know?" "Everything." Another pause, the sound of breathing across thousands of miles. "Then it's time," the voice said. "Time to finish what we started in Benghazi. Time to stop running." "I'm dying," Hawk said. "Cancer. 6 months, maybe less." "Then we don't have much time," the voice replied. "I'll be there in 48 hours. Don't do anything stupid until I arrive." "Who are you?" Hawk asked, though he thought he knew. The line went dead. Hawk set down the phone and walked to the window. Outside, the Wyoming night was vast and star-studded and beautiful in the way that wild places are beautiful. He'd spent 40 years in this country, raising cattle and his son and trying to forget, trying to be someone other than the coward who'd run from Benghazi. But the past had caught up. It always did. And now there was no more running, no more hiding, no more comfortable lies. Now there was only the truth. And the truth, Hawk knew, was going to get people killed. He walked to the barn, moving slow through the darkness, guided by memory and moonlight. Inside, he climbed the ladder to the loft where the hay bales were stacked high. In the far corner, beneath the floorboards he'd loosened 40 years ago, the box waited. He pulled it free, wooden, army surplus, locked with a combination only he knew. The lock clicked open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth untouched for decades, a Remington 700 rifle with custom modifications, 5,000 rounds of match-grade ammunition, photographs, documents, a recording device with a tape that held voices of dead men. And at the very bottom, wrapped separately with care and reverence, a black eagle pin, the emblem of Phantom Eagle, the mark of men who'd trusted each other, fought together, died together. All except one. Hawk lifted the rifle, felt its familiar weight, felt the years fall away. His hands steadied, his breath evened. The cancer pain faded to background noise. This was who he'd been, who he'd run from, who he'd have to become again if Tyler was going to survive what was coming. He descended the ladder carefully, the rifle in his arms like a sleeping child, and walked back to the house where the lights still burned and the ghosts waited patient in every shadow. Somewhere out in the darkness, his grandson was driving too fast on empty roads, angry and hurting and young enough to believe the world could still make sense. Somewhere out in that same darkness, Robert Kane was making phone calls, giving orders, setting pieces in motion for a game that had started 42 years ago and never really ended. And somewhere, someone else was coming, someone who'd survived Benghazi, someone who'd been hiding even longer than Hawk, someone whose voice on the phone had carried the weight of secrets and sacrifice and a promise 40 years in the making. The storm was coming. The past was rising. And James Maddox, the coward who'd run from Benghazi, was finally going to stand and fight. Even if it killed him. Especially if it killed him. Because some debts can only be paid in blood. And some truths can only be told by dead men walking. Dawn came cold and merciless across the Wyoming high country, painting the mountains in shades of iron and blood. James Maddox hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen table where he'd sat for 40 years, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago, the Remington 700 broken down and cleaned on the oilcloth in front of him. His hands moved through the familiar ritual without conscious thought, muscle memory from another lifetime, when he'd been younger and harder, and hadn't yet learned that some stains never wash clean. The truck's engine sound carried across the morning stillness before Tyler appeared, pulling up the long driveway with the sun at his back. The boy had been gone all night. Hawk had heard the phone calls, the slurred words of angry young men drinking away their confusion in roadhouse bars, had resisted the urge to follow, to protect, to wrap his grandson in the same comfortable lies that had kept him safe for 21 years. That time was over. Tyler came through the door without knocking, moving with the rigid control of someone fighting a hangover and losing. His eyes were red-rimmed and hard. He looked at the rifle parts spread across the table, at his grandfather's steady hands reassembling the weapon, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or fear. "You're really him," Tyler said. "Not a question, the coward from Benghazi, the ghost who ran." Hawk fitted the bolt assembly into place with a soft click. "I'm really him. And that man last night, Kane, he killed your team." "Yes. And Dad." Hawk's hands paused for just a moment, then continued their work. "Yes." Tyler moved to the coffee pot, poured a cup with hands that trembled slightly. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things that couldn't be unsaid, truths that couldn't be unknown. Outside, a magpie called harsh and insistent from the fence line. "So what happens now?" Tyler asked finally. "Now we wait." "For what?" "For the past to finish catching up." The words had barely left Hawk's mouth when gravel crunched in the driveway. Both men turned toward the window. A dark sedan, government issue by the look of it, Ford Crown Victoria with federal plates. It rolled to a stop near the porch, engine ticking in the morning quiet. A woman stepped out. She was maybe 45, dressed in dark slacks and a blazer that couldn't quite hide the service weapon at her hip. Her hair was pulled back severe and professional. She moved with the careful awareness of someone trained to notice threats, to calculate angles, to survive in a world that didn't forgive mistakes. She stopped at the base of the porch steps, her hand resting casual near her sidearm, her eyes taking in everything. The ranch house, the barn, the old man visible through the window with a rifle on his kitchen table. James Maddox. Her voice carried the flat authority of someone used to being obeyed. Hawk set down the rifle barrel slowly, rose from his chair with the careful movements of a man whose body had started betraying him. He walked to the door, Tyler close behind, and stepped out onto the porch. The woman held up a badge. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Linda Hayes, I need to speak with you about your son." "Sarah's been dead 15 years, Hawk said. "I know," Hayes lowered the badge, "because I've been investigating his death for the last 5 of them." Tyler moved forward. "What?" Hayes looked at the young man and something softened in her face. "You must be Tyler. Your father wrote about you, in his notes." "What notes?" Tyler's voice was sharp with sudden hope and anger mixed together. "What the hell is going on?" Hayes glanced around the empty land, the long sight lines, the absence of cover. "Can we talk inside? This conversation shouldn't happen in the open." Hawk studied her for a long moment, saw the tension in her shoulders, saw the way her eyes kept moving, scanning, watching, saw the truth written in the tight line of her mouth. "You're scared," he said. "Yes," she met his gaze directly. "Because 3 weeks ago, someone started uploading classified documents to the dark web. Documents about a CIA operation called Phantom Eagle. Documents that mention your real name. And 2 days ago, A man matching Robert Kane's description was spotted in Montana, 50 miles from here. Inside, Hawk said. They gathered around the kitchen table, the rifle parts pushed to one side, 3 people bound by secrets and blood and the sins of fathers. Hayes opened a leather briefcase, pulled out a thick file folder. My father was Marcus Hayes, she began, code name Falcon. He was the best shot in Phantom Eagle, the one who said no when Kane offered them the gold. Tyler leaned forward, the one Kane murdered. Hayes' jaw tightened. Yes, but I didn't know any of that until 5 years ago. My whole life I was told my father died in a hunting accident when I was 6. 1983, somewhere in Colorado. My mother raised me alone, told me he was a hero, told me he'd served his country with honor. She opened the file, spread photographs across the table. Images of men in desert camouflage. The same photo Kane had left the night before, but these were originals, uncreased, the faces clear and young and alive. When I joined the Marshal service, I started looking into his death. Something didn't add up. The story was too clean, too convenient, so I dug, used my clearance, pulled files that should have been destroyed. What did you find? Hawk asked quietly. That my father didn't die in Colorado, that he died in Libya, that the government declared him KIA in an operation that officially never happened, that 4 other men died with him, and that 1 man survived. She looked at Hawk. You. For a long time, no one spoke. The kitchen clock ticked steady and relentless, marking seconds that felt like years. Tyler stared at his grandfather, seeing him anew, this man who'd kept secrets deeper than graves. I should have died with them, Hawk said finally, should have pulled the trigger, should have done something other than run. But you didn't. Hayes' voice wasn't accusing, just tired. You survived, and my father's body was left in Benghazi for 40 years. Hawk felt the words like bullets. What do you want from me? The truth, all of it. Hayes pulled out a slim digital recorder. I've been building a case, collecting evidence. 3 months ago I found something. She pressed play. Static hissed for a moment, then a voice emerged. Older, rough, but unmistakably Robert Kane. The recording was a phone call, one-sided, Kane's voice calm and businesslike. The Maddox problem needs to be resolved. His son is getting too close. Make it look like an accident. No witnesses, no loose ends. Then a second voice, younger, professional. What about the father, the old man? Leave him, he's not a threat, never was. Click. Silence. Tyler's face had gone white. That's about Dad. That's Kane ordering the hit. I've had this recording for 3 months, Hayes said. Can't use it in court, obtained illegally, but it's proof. Your father was murdered, and Kane gave the order. Why are you here now? Hawk asked. Why today? Because yesterday I received this. Hayes pulled out her phone, opened an email, turned it so they could see. The sender was listed as assetex@phantom.net. The message was 3 lines. Marshal Hayes, the gold is still in Benghazi. Your father hid the evidence before he died, and Kane is coming to finish what he started 42 years ago. Who sent this? Tyler demanded. I don't know, Hayes admitted. The email was routed through a dozen proxy servers. Untraceable, but whoever sent it knows things only someone who was there could know. Hawk felt ice spread through his chest. There were 5 men in Benghazi, 4 are dead. Kane is alive, that leaves me. Unless someone else survived, Hayes said softly. Impossible, I saw Condor go down, saw Kane shoot him twice. Bodies were never recovered, Hayes said. CIA report says 4 KIA presumed, not confirmed, just presumed. You think Condor's alive? I think someone wants us to believe he is. Hayes closed the file, and I think Kane believes it too, because 3 days ago military contractors were hired, ex-Delta Force, 6 men, all with records of wet work and deniability, and they're heading this way. Tyler stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud. So Kane's sending a hit squad. To tie up loose ends, Hayes confirmed. You, your grandfather, me, anyone who knows the truth. Then we go to the police, Tyler said. To the FBI, to someone. Hayes shook her head. Kane has connections at every level, Justice Department, Pentagon, State. By the time we convinced anyone to listen, we'd be dead. Our only chance is to disappear or fight. Or finish it, Hawk said quietly. Both turned to look at him. Hawk met their eyes, feeling something shift inside him, some weight he'd carried for 40 years finally settling into place. Kane thinks I'm still the same coward who ran from Benghazi, thinks I'll roll over and die quiet, but he's wrong. What are you saying? Tyler asked. I'm saying we don't run, we don't hide, we end this, the way it should have ended 42 years ago. How? Hayes leaned forward. We're 3 civilians against trained killers and a billionaire with unlimited resources. We're not civilians, Hawk corrected. You're a federal marshal. I'm a ghost who's been dead for 40 years. And Tyler here can shoot the wings off a fly at 800 yards. I've never shot at a person, Tyler said, his voice tight. Might have to learn, Hawk replied, if you want to survive what's coming. Hayes studied the old man's face. You have a plan. Not yet, but I know someone who might. The mysterious emailer. Hawk shook his head slowly. Someone else. Someone I called last night. Someone who has as much reason to want Kane dead as any of us. Who? Before Hawk could answer, his phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. Check your barn, north corner. Under the third hay bale from the door. You'll find what you need. Hawk showed the message to the others. Tyler was already moving toward the door. Wait, Hayes said, her hand going to her weapon. This could be a trap. Only one way to find out, Hawk replied. They walked together to the barn, morning sun slanting long through the open doors, dust motes dancing in the light. The smell of hay and old wood and engine oil, the scent of Hawk's entire adult life spent trying to be someone other than who he was. Tyler counted bales, moved to the third one, heaved it aside with young strength. Underneath, a wooden crate, military surplus, the kind that held ammunition or medical supplies or things that needed to survive being dropped from planes. Hawk knelt with difficulty, his cancer-ridden body protesting. Opened the crate. Inside, wrapped in waterproof plastic, sealed with precision and care. 5 cell phones, prepaid, untraceable. Detailed maps of Benghazi, modern maps, satellite imagery, street layouts, building schematics. Weapons, 2 Glock 19s, ammunition, body armor. And at the bottom, a USB drive. Tyler picked it up. What's on it? Hawk plugged it into Hayes' laptop. A single video file appeared. He clicked play. The screen flickered, then resolved into the image of a man sitting in shadows, his face obscured by careful lighting and camera angles. Only his hands were visible, scarred and worn and steady. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like someone who'd spent years not speaking at all. Hello, Hawk, it's been a long time. Hawk felt his breath catch. If you're watching this, then Kane has made his move. Good. I've been waiting 42 years for him to slip up, for him to get desperate enough to break cover. The shadowed figure shifted. You're wondering who I am. You're wondering how I survived. The answer is simple. You're not the only one who ran from Benghazi. The difference is I ran with a purpose. I ran to survive, to gather evidence, to wait for the right moment. A pause, the sound of breathing. My name is David Chen, codename Condor, and yes, I'm alive. Tyler grabbed Hawk's shoulder. Holy shit. On screen, Condor continued. Kane shot me twice, left me for dead, but a local doctor found me. Anti-Gaddafi rebel. Hated the regime, hated the corruption, had no love for Americans but believed in the Hippocratic Oath. He saved my life. Took me 2 years to recover. Another year to make it back to the States with a new identity. The shadowed hands clasped together. I wanted to go public, to expose Kane, to honor Falcon and Vulture and Raven, but the CIA made it clear. If I talked, my family would disappear, my wife, my daughter, so I made a choice. The same choice you made, Hawk. I chose to live, to hide, to wait. Condor leaned forward slightly. But I never stopped watching, never stopped gathering evidence. And when Sarah Maddox contacted me in 2009 saying he'd found proof, I knew the time was coming. I tried to help him, tried to protect him, but Kane was faster, smarter, more ruthless. Another pause. Sarah's death was my failure. I've carried that guilt the same way you've carried yours. But now we have a second chance. Kane is exposed. The files are leaking. He's desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. The video shifted to show documents, bank records, photographs, shipping manifests. I've spent 40 years building a case. The gold is still in Benghazi, 50 million in bullion, sitting in a vault that Kane can't access without exposing himself. But with the files leaking, he has no choice. He has to recover it or destroy it, which means he has to go back. The camera returned to Condor's shadowed form. That's where we finish this, in Benghazi, where it started. I'll contact you again with details. Trust Marshal Hayes. She's her father's daughter, smart, brave, honorable, everything Falcon was. Condor stood, his silhouette tall and straight despite the years. One more thing, Hawk. You've spent 40 years calling yourself a coward, believing you ran while better men died, but you're wrong. You survived for a reason, because you were supposed to finish this. You were supposed to be the one who brought Kane down. The video began to fade. It's time to stop running, time to stand, time to be the man Phantom Eagle needed you to be. The screen went black. For a long moment, no one moved. The barn was silent except for the wind moving through the eaves and the distant call of a hawk riding thermals over the valley. Tyler spoke first. He's alive. Condor is alive. And he's been watching us, Hayes added, for years, decades, waiting. Hawk ejected the USB drive, held it in his palm like a talisman. He wants us to go to Benghazi. Into Kane's trap, Tyler said. Or into ours, Hawk corrected. If Condor's been planning this for 40 years, he's thought through every angle. Hayes paced the length of the barn. This is insane. We're talking about traveling to a war zone, to confront a man with unlimited resources and no conscience. The 3 of us and a ghost who may or may not show up. 4 of us, a voice said from the barn door. They spun. A man stood silhouetted against the morning sun, tall and lean, wearing a sheriff's uniform. Tom Briggs, 58 years old, Gulf War veteran, county sheriff for the last 20 years, friend to the Maddox family for longer than that. Tom, Hawk said carefully, this isn't your fight. Briggs walked into the barn, his hand resting easy on his service weapon. I've been listening from outside for the last 5 minutes. Heard enough to know you're in trouble. Heard enough to know you're planning something stupid. Sheriff Briggs, Hayes began, this is federal business. This is murder business, Briggs corrected. Sarah Maddox was my friend. I was at his funeral, stood there and listened to them call it an accident, and I knew it was wrong. Could feel it in my gut. Now you're telling me I was right. You were Hawk confirmed. Then I'm in. Briggs looked at each of them. I don't have much time left anyway. Cancer. Same as you, Hawk. Caught mine 2 years ago. Beaten it twice. Third time's not looking so good. Tom, I didn't know. Not many people do. Briggs smiled without humor. Figure I've got a year, maybe less. Rather spend it doing something that matters than sitting around waiting to die. This could get you killed faster, Tyler pointed out. We all die, son. Question is whether we die for something or for nothing. Your daddy died trying to expose a killer. That's something. I'd be honored to finish what he started. Hayes looked at Briggs with new respect. You understand what you're signing up for. This isn't a legal operation. This is off books. Black. If it goes wrong, there's no backup. No cavalry, no one's coming to save us. I understand, Briggs said simply, and I'm still in. Hawk felt something shift in his chest, something that felt almost like hope. 4 of us then, against Kane and his mercenaries. Bad odds, Tyler muttered. Phantom Eagle was never about odds, Hawk said. It was about precision, about being in the right place at the right time with the right shot. He picked up one of the prepaid phones from the crate. Time to let Condor know we're in. He typed a simple message to the number that had sent the text. We're ready, what's the next move? The response came within seconds. Go to ground. Kane's men are already in Wyoming. 6 contractors, ex-Delta, armed and dangerous. They'll hit the ranch within 48 hours. You need to disappear before they arrive. Where do we go? Hawk typed. Another message appeared. GPS coordinates followed by an address. Montana, old mining town called Silver Ridge, population 42. There's an abandoned Cold War bunker outside town. I've been using it as a base for the last 10 years. Everything you need is there. Weapons, intel, supplies. How do we know this isn't a trap? Hayes typed the question. Because if I wanted you dead, Condor replied, you'd already be dead. I've been watching the ranch for 3 days. Could have taken you out any time, but we're on the same side. Always have been. When do we leave? Hawk asked. Now they're closer than you think. As if on cue, Tyler's phone buzzed. A notification from the security camera he'd installed at the property entrance 6 months ago. Motion detected. He pulled up the app, and they all crowded around to see. 2 black SUVs, identical to the one Kane had arrived in, moving slow up the county road, scanning the properties, hunting. They're already here, Tyler said. Hawk was already moving. Grab what you need. 5 minutes. We travel light and we travel fast. They scattered. Tyler ran to the house for his go bag, the one he kept packed for hunting trips. Hayes pulled weapons from the crate, checked magazines, spare ammo. Briggs radioed his deputy, told him he was taking emergency leave, family emergency, would be unavailable. Hawk stood alone for a moment in the barn where he'd spent 4 decades hiding, looked at the tools and the equipment and the life he'd built from the ashes of who he used to be, all of it about to burn. He picked up the Remington 700, the rifle that had been his companion in Benghazi, in 100 other dark places before that, felt its familiar weight, felt the years fall away. Time to stop being James Maddox the rancher. Time to be Hawk again. They gathered at Briggs' personal truck, a beat-up Ford F-250 that wouldn't attract attention. Hayes drove. Briggs rode shotgun, literally, a Remington 870 across his lap. Tyler and Hawk in the back seat with the weapons crate between them. As they pulled out of the ranch, Hawk looked back once, saw the two SUVs turn onto his property, saw men in tactical gear emerging, moving with the practiced efficiency of professional killers. His home for 40 years, about to be torn apart by men searching for a ghost. Let them search, Hawk thought. The ghost isn't there anymore. They drove north through the morning, following back roads and fire trails, avoiding main highways. The GPS coordinates Condor had sent led them deeper into Montana, into country where mountains rose sharp and unforgiving against the sky, and towns were just collections of buildings clinging to survival in hard country. Silver Ridge appeared at noon, exactly as described. 42 people, one gas station, a general store that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1950, empty streets and shuttered windows, and the quiet of places the world had forgotten. They drove past town, following a dirt track into the hills. The bunker sat hidden in a ravine, covered in brush and thyme, invisible unless you knew where to look. Hayes stopped the truck. They sat in silence, staring at the concrete entrance half buried in the hillside. "Could still be a trap," she said. "Only one way to find out," Hawk replied, and opened his door. They approached carefully, weapons ready, every sense alert. The bunker door was steel, heavy, sealed with a keypad lock. As they reached it, Hawk's phone buzzed. "Code is 1982. Condor's message read, 'The year we all died.'" Hawk entered the numbers. The lock clicked. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Inside, lights flickered on automatically. The bunker stretched deep into the hillside, a relic from the Cold War when men had believed concrete and steel could protect them from nuclear fire. But this bunker had been repurposed. The walls were covered with maps and photographs and documents, a timeline stretching from 1978 to the present. Every member of Phantom Eagle, every mission, every death, every connection to Robert Kane. In the center of the room, a table held weapons, not old surplus, new, high-end, tactical gear that cost more than most people made in a year. And sitting at the table, waiting with the patience of a man who'd spent 40 years preparing for this moment, was David Chen. He stood as they entered. 72 years old, lean and hard, moving with a slight limp from old wounds that had never fully healed. His face was scarred, one eye clouded from damage that no surgery could fix, but his other eye was clear and sharp and burning with purpose. "Hello, Hawk," Condor said. "Welcome home." Hawk stared at his old teammate, his friend, the man he'd watched die 42 years ago, felt tears burn at the corners of his eyes. "David," he managed. "It's good to see you too," Condor replied, "even if it took the end of the world to get you here." They stood facing each other across 4 decades and a mountain of regrets. Then Hawk stepped forward and pulled Condor into an embrace. Two old soldiers who'd survived when they shouldn't have, who'd run when they should have fought, who'd carried guilt like stones in their pockets for longer than most men lived. "I'm sorry," Hawk said. "I'm so sorry I left you." "We both ran," Condor replied. "We both survived. Now we both finish this." They broke apart. Condor turned to the others. "Marshal Hayes, you have your father's eyes. He would be proud of the woman you've become." Hayes nodded, not trusting her voice. "Sheriff Briggs, your reputation precedes you. Good man in a hard job." Briggs extended his hand. "Honor to meet you, sir." "And Tyler." Condor looked at the young man with something like sadness. "You look like your father, act like him too, I'm told, asking questions, seeking truth. That's what got him killed." "Then let's make sure it wasn't for nothing," Tyler said. Condor smiled, spoken like a Maddox. He gestured to the table. "Sit. We have a lot to discuss and not much time." They gathered around the maps and the plans and the evidence of 40 years spent preparing for this moment. And as Condor began to speak, laying out his strategy, revealing the depth of his knowledge and the extent of his resources, Hawk felt something he hadn't felt in 4 decades. He felt like part of a team again, like Phantom Eagle was rising from the grave. And God help Robert Kane when they found him. The bunker smelled of gun oil and old concrete, and the particular stillness that comes from years of secrets kept in darkness. David Chen moved around the war room he'd built with the careful precision of a man who'd spent a lifetime planning for a single moment. The walls told a story in photographs and documents, a mosaic of obsession and patience that stretched back 4 decades. Hawk stood before the timeline, tracing the connections with his eyes. Phantom Eagle, the Benghazi mission, the massacre, the cover-up, and then the long tail of consequences, bodies, accidents, suicides. Every member of the team who died after that night in Libya, their deaths marked with red pins on a map that looked like a battlefield. "This is what I've been doing," Condor said quietly, standing beside his old friend. "While you were raising cattle and trying to forget, I was remembering, documenting, building the case that will bury Robert Kane." Tyler moved closer to study a photograph. Young men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling with the confidence of those who believe themselves immortal. His grandfather looked so young, so unburdened, a different person entirely. "Tell us the plan," Marshal Hayes said. She'd positioned herself near the door, old cop instincts keeping her back to the wall, eyes on exits. All of it. Condor pulled a remote from his pocket, clicked it. A screen descended from the ceiling, a projector humming to life. The image that appeared was a satellite view of Benghazi, the city sprawling across the Libyan coast, scarred and changed by decades of war and revolution. "The gold never left Libya," Condor began. 50 million in bullion. Kane couldn't move it without drawing attention, couldn't access it without exposing himself. So it's been sitting in the same vault for 42 years. "How do you know it's still there?" Briggs asked. "Because I've been watching." Condor clicked through images, security footage, satellite photos, guard rotations. "The vault is in the basement of what used to be a government building. Now it's controlled by a local warlord, man named Khalid al-Mansur, former Gaddafi loyalist. He knows something valuable is in that vault, but he doesn't know what, doesn't have the combination." "But Kane does," Hawk said. "Kane has half the combination," Condor corrected. The image changed, showing a document covered in numbers and codes. Falcon had the other half. He knew what Kane was planning, knew there'd be a betrayal. So the night before the massacre, he split the combination, gave half to his contact at the CIA, kept half hidden. "Where?" Hayes leaned forward. With his body, Condor's voice was gentle. "Your father was a careful man, Marshal. He knew if something went wrong, there'd be questions, investigations. So he left breadcrumbs, tattooed the combination on his skin in a place no casual examination would find." Hayes' face had gone pale. "You're saying his body is still in Benghazi?" Condor pulled up another image, a cemetery, graves marked with simple stones. After the revolution in 2011, some Western remains were recovered, repatriated. Your father's body was identified through dental records, returned to the U.S. He's buried at Arlington. "I've been to his grave," Hayes said softly, 50 times more. "I know," Condor met her eyes, "and I'm sorry to tell you this. But if we're going to stop Kane, we need that combination, which means we need to exhume your father's body." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Hayes stood rigid, her hands clenched at her sides, her face a mask of control barely held together. "No," she said finally, "absolutely not." Linda, Condor began. Don't, Hayes' voice cracked like a whip. Don't tell me it's necessary. Don't tell me it's what he would have wanted. Don't tell me anything except how we do this without disturbing my father's rest. There is no other way, Condor said simply. Kane will go to Benghazi. He'll try to access the vault. If he succeeds, he takes the gold and disappears. $50 million buys a lot of silence, a lot of dead witnesses. But if we get there first with the full combination, we can use the gold as bait, draw him into a trap. And if we don't, Tyler asked. Then Kane wins, Condor replied, again, like he's been winning for 42 years. Hawk turned to Hayes. Your call, Marshal. This is your father we're talking about, your grief, your choice. Hayes closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet but clear. How long? To get the exhumation order. Condor checked his watch. I have contacts. Federal judges who owe favors. 48 hours, maybe less. And then we go to Benghazi, all of us. We recover the gold, we set the trap, and we end this. Briggs shifted his weight, the movement drawing everyone's attention. Speaking as the only law enforcement official in the room who's not compromised, I got to say this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. We're talking about grave robbery, international travel to a war zone, theft of $50 million, and probably multiple homicides before it's done. Yes, Condor said simply. Briggs smiled. Just wanted to make sure we're all clear on that. You're okay with this? Tyler asked. Son, I've got 6 months to live. Cancer's eating my insides. I can spend that time watching daytime TV and feeling sorry for myself, or I can help put down a mad dog who's been killing good people for 40 years. He looked at each of them. Your father was my friend. He deserved better than a closed casket and a cover story. If this is how we give him justice, then I'm in. Condor nodded. Then we're agreed. 2 days to get the court order. 2 days to prepare. Then we fly to Benghazi and finish what Phantom Eagle started. What about Kane's mercenaries? Hayes asked. The ones hunting us right now. Let them hunt, Condor replied. They're looking in Wyoming. We're in Montana. By the time they realize we've moved, we'll be out of the country. And when we come back... If we come back, Hawk corrected quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one contradicted them. Tyler stepped outside the bunker as the others continued planning, needing air, needing space to process what they were about to do. The Montana night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. He walked to the edge of the ravine where the bunker was hidden and sat on a boulder, staring out at the darkness. His hands were shaking, had been shaking since the safe house, since the moment he'd realized this wasn't just about uncovering truth anymore. This was about violence, about going to a war zone, about maybe having to pull a trigger with a human being in the crosshairs. The rifle range back home had been one thing: steel targets, paper silhouettes, the abstract idea of marksmanship as a skill divorced from its purpose. But Benghazi would be different, real, final. Could he do it? Could he actually shoot someone? His father had. His grandfather had. Every generation of Maddox men seemed destined to carry weapons and make choices that left marks on the soul. Was that his legacy too? Was that what the gift of shooting really meant? Tyler Hawk's voice came from behind him. You okay? Tyler didn't turn around. I don't know if I can do this, Grandpa. The shooting part, the killing part. Hawk sat down beside his grandson, moving slow, his cancer-ridden body protesting. I was hoping you wouldn't have to. But I might. Yes, you might. They sat in silence for a long moment. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, the sound lonely and primal. I taught you to shoot, Hawk said finally, because your father asked me to. Last thing he said to me before he died. He said make sure Tyler knows how to protect himself. Make sure he can survive in a world that doesn't always play fair. He didn't mean this, Tyler said. Didn't mean going to Libya to hunt a killer. No, but he meant the principle. That sometimes good people have to stand up to bad people. That sometimes the cost of doing nothing is higher than the cost of doing something. What if I freeze? What if the moment comes and I can't pull the trigger? Hawk put a hand on Tyler's shoulder. Then you freeze, and we deal with it. But Tyler, listen to me. You're not a killer. You're a good kid with a good heart who's been dragged into something that should have ended before you were born. If we get through this and you never want to touch a rifle again, that's fine. That's more than fine. That's what I want for you. Then why bring me? Why not leave me here? Because you're the only family I have left. Hawk's voice cracked slightly. And if I'm going to die, which I probably am, I want to die knowing you're safe. Knowing you understand why. Knowing you had a chance to see this through to the end. Tyler felt tears on his cheeks. I'm scared. Good, fear keeps you alive. It's the men who aren't scared who make mistakes. What were you scared of in Benghazi the first time? Hawk was quiet for a long moment. Everything. Dying, failing, being wrong. But mostly I was scared of becoming the kind of man who could kill without feeling it. Who could pull the trigger and go to sleep at night like it meant nothing. Did you become that man? No, Hawk met his grandson's eyes. That's why I ran. Because I knew if I stayed, if I kept pulling triggers, eventually I would. Eventually the killing would be easier than the living. And I didn't want that. Is that why Dad died? Because he wouldn't run. Your father died because he believed in something more than survival. He believed in justice, in truth, in doing the right thing even when it cost everything. Hawk paused. You're more like him than you know. I hope so, Tyler said quietly. They sat together under the stars until the cold drove them back inside, where Condor had spread maps across the table and was detailing entry points and escape routes with the methodical precision of a man who'd planned this mission 1,000 times in his head. Tyler took his place at the table, still scared, still uncertain but present, ready to see it through. They spent the rest of the day going through Condor's intelligence. The man had been thorough to the point of obsession. He had floor plans of the vault building, guard schedules, weapon caches positioned throughout Benghazi, extraction routes, contingency plans for a dozen different scenarios. How long have you been preparing this? Hawk asked as they reviewed satellite imagery. Since the day I could walk again, Condor replied. The doctor who saved me, his name was Rashid. Good man, hated Gaddafi, hated corruption. When I told him what Kane had done, what the gold represented, he helped me. Gave me contacts, safe houses, a network of people who believed in justice. He's still alive. Condor shook his head, died in the revolution. 2011, but his son carries on the work. He'll be our contact in Benghazi. You trust him? Hayes asked. With my life, Condor said. I've trusted him with it for years. Night fell over the Montana mountains, darkness coming fast and absolute in country without light pollution. They ate MREs from Condor's supply cache, the food of soldiers and survivalists, and talked strategy until the words began to blur together. Tyler found Hawk alone on the bunker's observation deck, a concrete platform that overlooked the valley below. The old man stood with his hands in his pockets, staring out at stars so bright and numerous they looked like spilled salt across black velvet. You okay, Grandpa? Hawk smiled without turning. Haven't been called that in a while. Been Hawk or Maddox or old man. Grandpa feels strange now. You'll always be Grandpa to me, Tyler said. no matter what else you were. That's kind of you, boy, probably more than I deserve. They stood in silence for a while, two generations of Maddox men contemplating a future that seemed to narrow with each passing hour. I've been thinking, Tyler said carefully, about what happens after, if we survive this. And I don't want to be a soldier. Don't want to spend my life with a rifle in my hands, always looking over my shoulder for the next threat. Good, Hawk said firmly. That's exactly what you should be thinking. You're not disappointed. Disappointed. Hawk turned to face his grandson. Tyler, the whole point of this, of everything we're doing, is so you don't have to live the life I lived. Don't have to carry the weight your father carried. You get to choose something different, something better. What did you want to be before Phantom Eagle? A teacher, Hawk said quietly. History teacher. Thought I'd work in a small town somewhere. Coach baseball. Help kids understand where they came from so they could figure out where they were going. You still could. Hawk touched his chest where the cancer was eating him alive. I'm 71 years old and dying. That ship has sailed. But you, Tyler, you've got time, you've got choices. Don't waste them trying to honor ghosts. I won't, Tyler promised. The next morning, Condor's phone buzzed at dawn. He checked it, nodded once, and looked at Hayes. Court order came through. Federal judge in Virginia. We can exhume the grave at Arlington tomorrow morning at 0600. Small crew, discreet. No media, no witnesses. Hayes' face had gone pale, but her voice was steady. I want to be there. Of course. They drove south through the day, taking back roads and staying off major highways. Briggs had called in a favor, gotten them a place to stay outside D.C., a safe house used by the Marshal service for witness protection. Small, secure, anonymous. That night Hayes couldn't sleep. Hawk found her in the kitchen at 3 a.m., staring at a photograph of her father. The picture showed a young Marcus Hayes in his army dress uniform, fresh-faced and proud, probably taken just after boot camp. He looks like a good man, Hawk said quietly. He was, Hayes replied without looking up. My mother used to tell me stories. How he'd write her letters every week. How he'd send half his pay home. How he'd promised to come back and build her a house with a porch where they could watch sunsets. He never got to build that house. No, Hayes said. He died in the desert for a country that pretended he never existed. Hawk sat down across from her. I've spent 40 years trying to make peace with what happened in Benghazi. Never managed it, but I want you to know something. Your father stood up when it mattered. He said no when saying yes would have made him rich. He had honor, real honor, the kind that gets men killed but makes them worth remembering. Did you know him well? Well enough to know he wouldn't want you to carry this guilt. The guilt of exhuming him, of using his body to catch his killer. He'd understand. Hell, he'd insist. Hayes looked at Hawk with red-rimmed eyes. How do you know? Because it's what I'd want, Hawk said. If our situations were reversed, if it was me in that grave and your son standing here trying to decide, I'd want him to do whatever it took to get justice, to make my death mean something. A tear rolled down Hayes' cheek. She wiped it away quickly. Thank you, she whispered. Dawn came cold and gray over Arlington National Cemetery. The sacred ground where America buried its honored dead stretched in precise rows across the Virginia hills, white headstones like teeth, flags snapping in the wind, the weight of sacrifice made visible. They gathered at Marcus Hayes' grave in the pre-dawn darkness, a small crew, the cemetery director sworn to secrecy, 2 gravediggers, a forensic examiner, and the 4 members of what was left of Phantom Eagle, plus 1 sheriff and 1 young man who'd inherited more than he'd bargained for. Marshal Hayes stood at her father's headstone, reading the inscription for the 100th time. Marcus J. Hayes, Captain, U.S. Army, beloved father, died in service to his country. She placed a hand on the cold marble. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, "but I need your help one more time." The gravediggers began their work. The sound of shovels breaking earth seemed obscenely loud in the morning quiet. Hawk stood beside Hayes, a silent presence. Condor kept watch, his eyes scanning the cemetery for threats that might never come. Tyler stood apart, watching the process with a mixture of horror and fascination. This was what their hunt for justice demanded: disturbing the dead, violating sanctity, crossing lines that should never be crossed. "Is this worth it?" he asked quietly, not sure who he was asking. Briggs moved beside him. "Your father thought so. Died believing the truth mattered more than comfort, more than safety, more than leaving the past buried." Did he know it would come to this? Probably not, but he knew it would cost something. Everything worth doing does. It took an hour to reach the casket. When they lifted it from the ground, Hayes turned away, unable to watch. Briggs put a hand on her shoulder. The forensic examiner worked quickly and professionally. Opened the casket, examined the remains with practiced efficiency. And there, just as Condor had predicted, tattooed on Marcus Hayes' inner thigh where no casual examination would find it, a string of numbers. The examiner photographed them, closed the casket. Within 30 minutes, Marcus Hayes was back in his grave, the earth replaced, the headstone straightened. As if they'd never been there. As if the dead could rest undisturbed. Hayes knelt at the grave after the others had left, after the cemetery had returned to its usual silence. "I'll make this right, Dad," she said. "I promise. I'll make sure your death meant something." The wind carried her words away, across the field of the honored dead. They met at the safe house to compare the numbers. Condor already had half the combination from his own sources, details he'd extracted over 40 years of careful investigation. Now they had the other half. Together, the numbers formed a complete sequence. The key to $50 million and the end of Robert Kane. "We leave tonight," Condor said. "Private charter to Morocco. From there, overland into Libya. We'll be in Benghazi in 48 hours. "What about weapons?" Tyler asked. "Already in country," Condor replied. "Rashid's son has been stockpiling for years. Everything we need is waiting." "And Kane?" "Will be right behind us," Condor said, "or right ahead. He knows the files are leaking, knows his time is running out. He'll make his move soon." "How do you know?" Briggs asked. "Because I leaked the files," Condor said simply. The room went silent. "You what?" Hawk stared at his old friend. "I leaked them," Condor repeated. 3 weeks ago, through anonymous channels, WikiLeaks, the dark web, carefully selected documents that would force Kane's hand without exposing our plan." "You set this whole thing in motion," Hayes said. "I've been setting it in motion for 40 years, Condor corrected. "This is just the end game. I needed Kane desperate, needed him to make mistakes, needed him to go after the gold himself instead of sending intermediaries. This is personal now. For him, for all of us." Tyler shook his head in disbelief. "You've been playing chess while the rest of us didn't even know we were on the board." "War is chess," Condor said, "just with higher stakes, and I've had a long time to plan my moves." "What if Kane doesn't show? What if he sends his mercenaries instead?" "He'll show," Condor said with absolute certainty. "Because he's like me, like Hawk, like every member of Phantom Eagle. We don't send others to do our killing. We do it ourselves. That's what made us different, what made us dangerous, and what's going to get Kane killed." They packed light, tactical gear, weapons, medical supplies, no identification, nothing that could trace back to their real lives. They were ghosts now, phantoms, men and women who'd stepped outside the law and wouldn't be coming back the same. "If we do this," Briggs said as they loaded the vehicle, "there's no going back. We'll be wanted, criminals, fugitives." "We've been fugitives our whole lives," Hawk replied. "Just took us 40 years to admit it." The flight to Morocco was uneventful, private charter, no questions asked, no records kept, the kind of flight rich men and wanted men used when they needed to disappear. They landed in Marrakesh at midnight local time. A contact of Condors met them with a van and drove them through the night toward the Libyan border. The landscape scrolled past in darkness, vast and empty, the kind of country where men could vanish and never be found. At dawn, they crossed into Libya through routes that existed only for smugglers and spies. No checkpoints, no officials, just open desert and the promise of violence for those who asked too many questions. Benghazi appeared on the horizon like a mirage. The city had been beautiful once, a jewel of the Mediterranean. Now it was scarred by revolution and civil war. Buildings collapsed, streets cratered, the architecture of hope destroyed by the machinery of conflict. They drove to a safe house in the old quarter, a building that looked abandoned from the outside but held weapons and supplies inside. Rashid's son met them there, a man in his 40s with his father's eyes and his father's commitment to justice. "My father spoke of you," he said to Condor, "called you the American ghost, said you would return one day to finish what was started." "That day is now," Condor replied. Rashid's son led them to a cache of weapons that would have impressed a small army. AK-47s, American M4s, sniper rifles, explosives, everything they needed for a war. "The vault is still guarded," he explained, pointing to a map. "Al-Mansur has 20 men, well-armed, well-trained, former Gaddafi military." "We're not going through them," Condor said. "We're going under." He traced a line on the map. "The old city has tunnels, Roman, Ottoman, used by smugglers for centuries. One tunnel comes up directly beneath the vault building. We go in quiet, get the gold, set the trap, and wait for Kane." When, Hawk asked. "Tonight," Condor said. They spent the day preparing, checking weapons, reviewing the plan, each of them alone with their thoughts and their fears and the knowledge that some of them wouldn't be coming back. Tyler found Hawk cleaning his rifle on the roof of the safe house. The Mediterranean stretched blue and infinite to the north, beautiful and indifferent to the small dramas of men. "If I don't make it," Tyler began. "You'll make it," Hawk interrupted. "But if I don't, if something happens, I want you to know I understand why you ran, why you kept the secrets. You were trying to protect the people you loved. That's not cowardice, that's just love." Hawk's hands stilled on the rifle. He looked at his grandson with eyes that had seen too much and hidden too much, and finally, after 40 years, were ready to see clearly. "Your father said something similar," Hawk said quietly, "right before he died. Told me he understood, told me he forgave me. I didn't believe him, thought he was just being kind. But maybe he meant it." "He did," Tyler said, "and so do I." Hawk pulled his grandson into an embrace. This boy who'd become a man in the space of a week, who'd learned that his family history was written in blood and secrets, and the hard choices that define us. "Thank you, boy," Hawk whispered, "for being better than both of us." Night fell over Benghazi like a curtain, absolute and complete. The city's power grid was unreliable, whole neighborhoods going dark for hours at a time. They used the darkness as cover. 6 people entered the tunnels beneath the old city. Hawk and Condor in the lead, moving through the ancient passages with the certainty of men who'd navigated worse. Hayes and Briggs in the middle, weapons ready. Tyler bringing up the rear, his young eyes sharp in the dark. The tunnel smelled of age and moisture, and the particular staleness of air that hadn't moved in centuries. Their flashlights cut narrow beams through the darkness, illuminating stone walls covered in graffiti from a dozen civilizations. "This way," Condor whispered, and they followed him deeper into the earth. Above them, the vault building sat quiet and guarded. Below, they moved like ghosts toward a confrontation 42 years in the making. The tunnel ended at an iron grate set into the ceiling. Condor checked his GPS, directly beneath the vault. He pulled bolt cutters from his pack. The metal was old, corroded. It cut easily. They pushed the grate aside and climbed up into a basement that hadn't seen light in decades. The vault door stood before them, massive, steel, sealed with a combination lock that had kept it secret for 40 years. Condor pulled out the numbers, Marcus Hayes' final gift to his daughter, the key to justice. He began to dial, each number clicking into place with mechanical precision. And somewhere above them, in the darkness of the Benghazi night, Robert Kane was coming. The trap was set. The players were in position. And the final act of Phantom Eagle's long tragedy was about to begin. The vault door swung open with a sound like a tomb unsealing. 42 years of silence broken by the turning of a lock that had kept its secret through wars and revolutions, and the slow decay of empires. The darkness inside was absolute, untouched by light since 1982, when 5 men had stood in this same basement and made choices that would echo through decades. Condor stepped through first, his flashlight cutting through air thick with dust and time. The beam swept across stacks of wooden crates, military surplus containers, and there in the center, exactly where it had been left 4 decades ago, the gold. $50 million in bullion, bars stamped with Libyan government seals, each one worth a fortune, together worth enough to buy silence, to erase history, to make men into ghosts. "It's really here," Hayes whispered, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Did you doubt?" Condor asked. "Part of me hoped it was gone, that Kane had already taken it, that we could just walk away." "We stopped being able to walk away a long time ago," Hawk said quietly. He stood at the vault entrance, one hand on the cold steel, feeling the weight of years pressing down. "This is where it ends, one way or another." They moved quickly, efficiently, years of training overriding the shock of actually finding what they'd come for. Briggs and Tyler set up defensive positions at the tunnel entrance. Hayes photographed everything, evidence that would be needed if any of them survived to tell the story. Condor began rigging the gold with tracking devices, small GPS units that would broadcast their location to satellites overhead. "When Kane comes for this, we'll know," Condor explained as he worked. "Every bar tagged, every crate marked. He can't move it without us knowing exactly where it goes." "And if he doesn't come?" Tyler asked from his position by the tunnel. "He'll come," Hawk said with absolute certainty. "Men like Kane don't walk away from $50 million, don't walk away from the thing they killed for. He'll come." They worked in silence for 20 minutes, the only sounds their breathing and the soft click of equipment being placed. The vault felt like a church, sacred space where terrible sins had been committed and now, perhaps, would be answered for. Hawk found himself standing before the gold, staring at the metal that had cost so many lives. Marcus Hayes, David Chen's 2 years of agony, Sarah Maddox, all the others who died in the long shadow of this moment. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. Condor looked up from his work. "What?" "All of this, the running, the hiding, the 40 years of guilt, was it worth it?" Condor was silent for a long moment. Then, carefully, he said, "I used to ask myself that every day. Every morning I'd wake up and wonder if I should have just died in that basement with Falcon and the others, if running was worse than staying. And I realized it wasn't about worth. It was about what came next. I survived. You survived. We had a choice. Live with the guilt or do something about it." He gestured to the vault. "This is us doing something about it." A sound from above froze them all. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving quickly through the building overhead. "They're here," Briggs whispered, his weapon coming up. "Everyone down," Condor hissed. "Lights out." Radio silence. They killed their flashlights, plunging the vault into absolute darkness. The kind of darkness that pressed against your eyes, that made you question whether they were open or closed. Above them, the footsteps continued, methodical, searching. Hawk counted at least 6 different sets of feet. Kane's mercenaries. The Delta Force contractors who'd been hunting them across 2 continents. Professional killers who'd fought in every dirty war from Iraq to Afghanistan, who knew how to clear buildings and eliminate targets and disappear before the bodies were found. In the darkness, Tyler's hand found Hawk's shoulder. The boy was breathing hard, fear making his chest tight. Hawk squeezed his grandson's hand once, a silent message. "We survived this. Together." The footsteps passed overhead, moved to another part of the building, faded. They waited 5 minutes, 10, 15. Then Condor's radio crackled softly. A voice speaking Arabic. Rashid's son, their lookout positioned on a rooftop 3 blocks away. 3 vehicles just arrived. Black SUVs, American style, 8 men deploying military-grade weapons, and 1 older man, silver hair, expensive suit. Kane, Hawk breathed. "He's here," Condor confirmed. "The game just changed." "What's the play?" Hayes asked. Condor was already moving, his mind working through scenarios and probabilities. "We can't fight 8 trained operators in close quarters. We'd lose. So we don't fight. We let them find the gold." "What?" Tyler's voice carried shock. "We let them find it," Condor repeated. "Let them think they won. Let them start moving it. Then we follow. And when they're vulnerable, when they're confident, we strike." "That's insane," Briggs said. "That's tactics," Condor corrected. "We're outgunned and outnumbered. Our only advantage is they don't know we're here. So we stay hidden, we wait, we watch." "And if they find us first?" Hayes asked. Condor's smile was invisible in the darkness but audible in his voice. "Then we die fighting. Like Phantom Eagle should have died 42 years ago." They retreated deeper into the tunnels, moving away from the vault, finding positions in the ancient passageways where they could observe without being seen. Condor had rigged cameras throughout the vault, tiny wireless units that fed to a tablet he carried. They watched the screens in silence as Kane's men entered the basement. The mercenaries moved like professionals, clearing corners, checking angles, weapons up and ready. 6 of them spread through the space, efficient and deadly. Then 2 more figures appeared. Robert Kane looked exactly as he had in Wyoming. Silver hair perfect, suit immaculate, moving with the casual confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences for his actions. But there was tension in his shoulders now, a tightness around his eyes. The leak had rattled him, made him desperate. And beside him a man Hawk didn't recognize. Younger, maybe 40, hard eyes and military bearing. He carried himself like someone used to command. "Who's that?" Tyler whispered. Condor's face had gone pale. "That's Marcus Kane, former CIA, runs Kane's security now, also happens to be Kane's son." Hawk felt ice spread through his chest. Kane has a son. Had him with an asset in Lebanon, 1980s, brought him to the States. raised him, trained him. He's everything Kane is but younger and meaner. This just keeps getting better, Briggs muttered. On the screen, they watched Kane approach the gold, watched him run his hand over the bars with something like reverence, watched him smile. "It's still here," Kane said, his voice picked up by the cameras. "After all these years, still here." "Should have moved it decades ago," Marcus Kane replied. "Too risky, too many eyes, too many questions." Kane turned to face his son. "But now the questions are being asked anyway. The files are leaking. Names are being named. We have 48 hours before this whole thing goes public. So we take the gold. We disappear. We let the dead bury the dead." "And the ones who aren't dead yet?" Kane asked. Hawk Chen, the marshal, the sheriff, the boy. Kane's voice was flat, emotionless. "They're all loose ends." "Then cut them," Kane said simply, "permanently." In the tunnel, Hawk felt Tyler stiffen beside him, heard the boys breathing quicken, felt rage building in his grandson like a storm about to break. "Easy," Hawk whispered, "not yet." On the screen, Kane was giving orders. "Start loading. I want this moved by dawn, 3 trucks, spread the loads, different routes. We consolidate in Malta." The mercenaries began working, hauling crates, loading the gold. It took them an hour of watching, waiting, feeling every second stretch like hours. When the last crate was loaded, Kane took one final look around the vault. His eyes seemed to linger on the shadows, as if sensing something, as if knowing that ghosts never really stay buried. "Goodbye, old friend," he said quietly, to the empty air, to Marcus Hayes' memory, to everyone he'd killed in this basement 4 decades ago. "May you rest easier than I will." Then he turned and walked out. The mercenaries followed. The basement fell silent. "Give them 5 minutes," Condor said. "Let them think they're clear." Those 5 minutes felt like 5 hours, sitting in the darkness, listening to truck engines start overhead, hearing vehicles pulling away, knowing that $50 million in stolen gold was moving through Benghazi and they were letting it happen. "Now," Condor said. They moved. Up through the tunnels, out into the Benghazi night. The city was dark, power out in this quarter, the streets empty of everything except shadows and the occasional stray dog. 3 blocks away, Rashid's son waited with a vehicle, an old Land Cruiser that had seen better decades but still ran. "They're heading north," he reported, "toward the coast. 3 trucks, taking different routes but all converging on the old port." "Can you follow without being seen?" Condor asked. "In this city, at night," Rashid's son smiled. "I could follow them on foot and they'd never know." They piled into the Land Cruiser, weapons ready, nerves stretched tight. Rashid's son drove like he'd been born behind the wheel, navigating the dark streets with the confidence of someone who knew every alley and side road. The tracking devices on the gold showed 3 distinct signals, moving through the city in a pattern designed to spot tails. But Rashid's son was better than any of Kane's mercenaries. He kept distance, used parallel streets, never gave them a direct line of sight. "They're converging," Condor said, watching the tablet. "All 3 trucks, meeting at the port." "What's the plan?" Hayes asked. "We wait for them to start loading the boat," Condor replied. "When they're focused on the transfer, when their guard is down, we move." "Against 8 train killers," Briggs said, "while they're alert and armed." "Bad odds," Condor agreed, "but we don't need to beat all of them, just Kane." The port appeared ahead, a sprawl of docks and warehouses that had seen better days. Most of it was abandoned, infrastructure destroyed by years of conflict. But one dock still functioned, kept operational by smugglers and warlords and men like Robert Kane who needed to move things that shouldn't be moved. A cargo ship sat waiting, small, rusted, flying a Maltese flag, the kind of vessel that appeared in no official registries and asked no questions about cargo. The three trucks pulled up to the dock. Kane emerged from the lead vehicle, Kane beside him. The mercenaries began unloading, moving the gold from trucks to ship with practiced efficiency. Condor, Hawk, Hayes, Briggs, Tyler, and Rashid's son took positions in the warehouses surrounding the dock. 6 against 8. Bad odds made worse by the open ground they'd have to cross. On my signal, Condor whispered into his radio. "We go for Kane first. Take him alive if possible. We need his confession. We need him to answer for what he did." "And if he doesn't surrender," Hayes asked, "then we make sure he doesn't leave Benghazi alive." They waited, watching, as crate after crate was loaded. As the mercenaries grew more relaxed, thinking they'd won, thinking the ghosts of Phantom Eagle had finally been laid to rest. Hawk found himself thinking about Sarah, about his son's last moments, about the fear and confusion and betrayal he must have felt when Kane's men ran him off that Wyoming road, about justice delayed for 15 years, for 42 years, finally within reach. His hands were steady on his rifle. The tremor that had plagued him was gone. The cancer pain was a distant thing, irrelevant. In this moment, he wasn't a 71-year-old man dying of disease. He was Hawk, the spotter, the survivor, the ghost who'd come back to settle accounts. "Last crate," Kane called out. "Button it up. We sail in 10 minutes." Condor's voice came over the radio. "Positions on 3, 1, 2. The night exploded. Condor's first shot took out the dock lights, plunging the area into darkness. Hawk's second shot punctured the lead truck's fuel tank, diesel spraying across concrete. Hayes and Briggs opened up with suppressing fire, forcing the mercenaries to cover. And Tyler, positioned on a rooftop with a clear line of sight, took the shot his grandfather had taught him. 800 yards, moving target, night conditions. The round took Marcus Kane in the shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him to the dock. "Contact," one of the mercenaries screamed. Multiple shooters, north and west. Return fire lit up the night. Muzzle flashes like strobe lights. The crack of assault rifles and the heavier thump of Hawk's Remington. Cordite and chaos, and the particular clarity that comes in combat when every second could be your last. Hawk moved between positions, firing, relocating, firing again. Old training coming back like muscle memory. He saw a mercenary go down, didn't know whose shot had done it. Saw another take cover behind the truck. Saw Kane running for the ship, leaving his wounded son behind. "He's running," Hawk shouted into his radio. "Kane's running for the boat." "I've got him," Tyler's voice came back. "Negative," Condor barked. "Alive, we need him alive." But Tyler had already taken the shot. Not at Kane. At the ship's gangway. The round severed the ropes holding it to the dock. The gangway crashed into the water, cutting off Kane's escape. Kane turned, trapped between the dock and the ship, his face twisted with rage and fear. He pulled a pistol from his jacket, firing wildly toward the warehouses. "Enough," Condor's voice rang out across the dock. He stepped from cover, rifle aimed at Kane's chest. "It's over, Reaper. 42 years, it's finally over." Kane's laughter was harsh and broken. "Over? You think this is over? I have lawyers, I have senators, I have resources you can't imagine. I'll be out in a week, a month at most." "Not this time," Hayes said, emerging from the other side. "We have evidence, recordings, witnesses, and most importantly, we have the gold, your gold, with your fingerprints all over it." "Circumstantial," Kane spat. "You have nothing." "We have your son," Briggs added, his weapon trained on Marcus Kane, still bleeding on the dock. Wonder what he'll say when he realizes Daddy used him as a shield while running for that boat. Cain looked up at his father, blood spreading across his expensive shirt, understanding dawning in his eyes. Dad. Shut up, Marcus, Cain hissed. You left me, Cain said, his voice carrying disbelief and betrayal. You were running, leaving me behind. Tactical retreat, Cain snapped, but something in his eyes gave him away. The same cold calculation that had let him kill his team 42 years ago. The same ruthlessness that valued survival over loyalty. A figure moved in Tyler's peripheral vision. One of the mercenaries using the distraction trying to flank their position. Tyler's training kicked in before his mind could process. Swung the rifle, found the target, center mass. His finger moved to the trigger. Time slowed. The mercenary was young, maybe 25, someone's son, someone's brother, a human being with hopes and dreams and people who loved him. Tyler could see his face in the scope, see the determination, see the weapon coming up. And Tyler froze. The mercenary's rifle was rising, aiming. Tyler's finger trembled on the trigger. Every lesson his grandfather had taught him screaming in his head. Steady breath, steady hand, squeeze. But he couldn't. This wasn't a steel target, wasn't paper. This was a person, this was killing. Tyler Briggs' voice cracked over the radio. Left flank, you got him. Tyler's vision blurred. His breathing came in gasps. The mercenary had him now, had a clear shot, was taking aim. And then Briggs was there, moving from his position, putting himself between Tyler and the threat. The sheriff's rifle cracked once, twice. The mercenary went down. Move, Briggs shouted at Tyler. Get to cover now. Tyler scrambled back from the rooftop edge, his hands shaking, his heart hammering, bile rising in his throat. He'd frozen. In the moment that mattered, he'd frozen. Almost gotten Briggs killed. He slumped against the wall, weapon across his lap, fighting the urge to vomit. This was what combat really was. Not the clean precision of the rifle range, but chaos and fear and the terrible weight of taking a human life. You okay up there? Hawk's voice came through the radio. Tyler keyed the mic with a trembling hand. I froze, Grandpa. I had the shot and I froze. You're alive, that's what matters. Stay down, stay safe. We've got this. But Tyler could hear the concern in his grandfather's voice. Could hear the fear that his grandson's hesitation might cost them everything. Down on the dock, the confrontation continued. Hawk stepped forward, his rifle aimed at Cain's head. Where's Sarah? Where did you have him killed? Wyoming, Highway 14. Cain's voice was flat, professional hit, made to look like an accident. Same team I used on Falcon's wife, on Condor's daughter, on everyone who got too close. You killed my mother. Cain's voice was barely a whisper. She was asking questions, Cain said without emotion, becoming a liability. The gunshot surprised everyone. Marcus Cain had pulled a backup weapon, had aimed it not at the people surrounding them, but at his father. The round took Robert Cain in the stomach, not immediately fatal but devastating. Cain collapsed, hands pressed to the wound, blood spreading between his fingers. Cain dropped the gun, slumped back against the truck. You killed her, he said, tears streaming down his face. Your own wife, my mother, for what? For money. For survival, Cain gasped. For the mission, for. The words died as Condor stepped forward, standing over the man who'd killed his team, who'd stolen 42 years of his life, who'd built an empire on blood and betrayal. Marcus Hayes was my friend, Condor said quietly. He had a daughter, a wife, a future. You took that from him for gold, for greed, for nothing that mattered. Cain looked up, blood on his lips. You ran too, he whispered. You abandoned them just like Hawk did. No, Condor said, we survived. There's a difference. We lived to tell the truth, to bring you to justice. And now, finally, after 42 years, that's exactly what's happening. Sirens wailed in the distance. Libyan police, maybe military. Rashid's son had made the call, reporting gunfire at the port, knowing that authority was coming. We need to move, Hayes said, now. What about him? Briggs gestured to Kane, still bleeding on the dock. Leave him, Hawk said coldly. Let him answer to the Libyans. Let him try to explain what he's doing with 50 million in stolen gold. Let him spend whatever time he has left in a prison cell instead of a penthouse. You can't, Kane gasped. You need me, for testimony, for evidence. We have everything we need, Condor said. He held up a small recorder. Every word you said tonight, every confession, every admission, you just buried yourself. The sirens were getting closer. And your son, Hayes asked, looking at Marcus Kane, what about him? Kane met her eyes. I'll stay. Face what's coming, tell them everything. He looked at his father with contempt. It's what she would have wanted, what my mother deserved. They moved quickly, leaving the dock, leaving the gold, leaving Robert Kane bleeding on the concrete with his son's betrayal and the approaching sirens. Tyler climbed down from his rooftop position on shaking legs, his rifle feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Briggs met him at the bottom, put a hand on the young man's shoulder. You did fine, he said. I froze, Tyler replied, his voice breaking. Almost got you killed. But you didn't, and I'm still here. That's what matters. I couldn't do it, couldn't pull the trigger on another person. Good, Briggs said firmly. That means you're still human. That means you haven't crossed the line the rest of us had to cross. Hold on to that, Tyler. Don't ever let go. They piled into the Land Cruiser, Rashid's son driving fast through the dark streets, putting distance between them and the port. Behind them, the sound of vehicles screeching to a halt, shouted commands in Arabic, the chaos of authority arriving too late to stop what had already been set in motion. Tyler sat in the back, his hands still trembling, his mind replaying the moment over and over. The mercenary's face in his scope, his finger frozen on the trigger, the terrible knowledge that he couldn't do what soldiers were supposed to do. Hawk turned in his seat, meeting his grandson's eyes. You okay, boy? Tyler shook his head. I'm not cut out for this, Grandpa. I'm not a soldier. I'm not you or Dad or any of the men in Phantom Eagle. Thank God for that, Hawk said quietly. Thank God you're not us. They drove through the night, following routes Rashid's son knew by heart, heading for the border and safety and whatever came next. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sand in shades of gold and amber, they finally allowed themselves to believe it might actually be over. Condor turned to Hawk in the back seat. 42 years. 42 years, Hawk repeated, and it's finally done. What happens now? Tyler asked, his voice still shaky. Now we go home, Hayes said. We release the evidence. We let the world know what really happened to Phantom Eagle. We give the dead the honor they deserved. And Kane, Briggs asked. Condor checked his phone, reading a news alert that had just come through. Robert Kane, American defense contractor, arrested in Benghazi by Libyan authorities, found with 50 million in stolen bullion, son testifying against him, multiple murder charges pending in U.S. He looked up, meeting each of their eyes. Justice isn't always clean, isn't always fast, but sometimes if you wait long enough, if you refuse to give up, it actually comes. The Land Cruiser crossed the border as the sun climbed higher, leaving Libya behind, leaving the ghosts of Benghazi to their rest. In his pocket, Hawk carried a photograph, The original, 5 men in desert camouflage, young and confident and alive. Phantom Eagle before the fall. He looked at it one last time, then carefully tore it in half, separating himself from the others. The past couldn't be changed, but it could finally, mercifully be laid to rest. And in the front seat, Tyler sat with his rifle across his lap, understanding now what his grandfather had tried to tell him all along, that the greatest strength wasn't in pulling the trigger, but in knowing when not to. That mercy wasn't weakness, and that breaking the cycle of violence was the bravest thing a Maddox man could do. The Montana sunrise painted the mountains in shades of fire and gold, light spilling across valleys where snow still clung to the highest peaks despite the promise of spring. 6 weeks had passed since Benghazi. 6 weeks since the confrontation that had ended Robert Kane's empire and begun the slow, painful process of truth-telling. James Maddox stood on the porch of the ranch he'd rebuilt with his own hands, watching steam rise from his coffee cup into the cold morning air. The house had been damaged when Kane's mercenaries tore through it searching for evidence, but the bones were good. The foundation solid. Like the man himself, it could be repaired. Behind him, through the window, he could see Tyler asleep on the couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, exhausted from another day of interviews and depositions and the grinding machinery of justice finally, belatedly, turning its wheels. The story had broken 3 weeks ago. Every major news network, every newspaper. The classified files Condor had spent 40 years collecting, now released to the public in a coordinated dump that left no room for denial or spin. Phantom Eagle, the black operations unit that never officially existed. 5 men sent to do America's darkest work, betrayed by their own commander for gold and greed, covered up by a CIA that valued secrecy over truth, and the survivors who'd spent decades in hiding, waiting for the moment when the scales might finally balance. The footage of Robert Kane's arrest had played on loop for days. The billionaire defense contractor, architect of modern military privatization, exposed as a murderer and thief. His son's testimony had been devastating, detailed, unflinching. Marcus Kane had held nothing back, describing years of watching his father build an empire on blood money, of slowly realizing the man he'd idolized was a monster. Kane himself had survived the gunshot wound, survived to face extradition, survived to stand trial in a federal courthouse where the weight of evidence crushed any hope of acquittal. The sentence had come down yesterday. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. The rest of his days to be spent in a cell instead of a penthouse, contemplating the cost of choices made in a Benghazi basement 42 years ago. Hawk heard the boards creak behind him. Tyler emerged onto the porch, hair disheveled, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Couldn't sleep?" Tyler asked. "Don't sleep much these days," Hawk admitted. "Too much to think about, too much to remember." They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 generations of Maddox men watching the sun climb higher, chasing shadows from the valleys. "The doctors called yesterday," Tyler said carefully. "While you were out, they want you to come in, discuss treatment options." Hawk nodded slowly. He'd been avoiding their calls for weeks, knowing what they'd say, knowing the cancer that had been stage 3 was now stage 4, spreading through his body like fire through dry timber, knowing that treatment at this point was less about cure and more about buying time measured in weeks instead of days. "I'll call them back," Hawk said. "Grandpa." "I said I'll call them back." Another silence, the kind weighted with things unsaid, with fears neither wanted to voice. "You should do the treatment," Tyler said finally. "Fight this. You beat Kane, you can beat this too." Hawk smiled sadly. "Some battles aren't meant to be won, boy. Some fights are just about how you go down." Don't talk like that. It's not giving up. Hawk turned to face his grandson. It's accepting reality. I'm 71 years old. I've got cancer eating my insides. I've lived 40 years longer than I had any right to after Benghazi. Every day since then has been borrowed time, and I've made peace with that. I haven't, Tyler said, his voice cracking. Hawk pulled his grandson into an embrace, feeling the boy's shoulders shake, feeling his own eyes burn with tears he'd promised himself he wouldn't shed. I know, he whispered. I know it's not fair, but fair stopped being part of the equation a long time ago. A vehicle appeared on the road, kicking up dust. Federal plates. Hawk recognized the car before it pulled to a stop near the porch. Marshal Hayes emerged, dressed in her service uniform, looking official and tired and somehow lighter than she'd been 6 weeks ago. Like a weight had been lifted, like she could finally breathe. She climbed the steps, nodded to both men, mourning. Marshal, Hawk said, "This official." "Semi-official." Hayes held up a folder. "Thought you'd want to see these, fresh from D.C. She spread documents across the porch table. Official letterhead, Department of Defense, Central Intelligence Agency, letters of commendation, medals authorized but never awarded, recognition that had been buried for 40 years now being dragged into daylight. They're reinstating Phantom Eagle service records, Hayes explained. Full honors, full recognition. Marcus Hayes, David Chen, Antonio Ruiz, Thomas Blake, all of them. No longer listed as training accidents or administrative discharges, listed as what they were. Operators who died in the line of duty. Heroes who gave their lives for their country. And the ones who survived, Hawk asked quietly. You too. Hayes pulled out another document. Full pardon for any and all actions taken in relation to the Benghazi operation. Recognition of service. And this. She held up a small box. The medals they should have given you 43 years ago. Hawk opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, a silver star. A purple heart. Commendations for valor that should have been pinned to his chest in some Pentagon ceremony, surrounded by brass and politicians and the pageantry of official gratitude. Instead, they'd been hidden, denied, erased. Until now. I don't deserve these, Hawk said. Hayes met his eyes. My father would disagree. Condor would disagree. Your son would disagree. You survived when you should have died. You kept the truth alive when it would have been easier to let it bury. And when the moment came, you finished what they started. If that's not deserving, I don't know what is. Tyler took the metal box from his grandfather's shaking hands. Is there a ceremony? Next month, Arlington. Hayes pulled out an invitation. Full military honors, press coverage, the works. They want to make a statement. Show that the truth matters, that accountability matters, even 40 years late. Will you be there? Hawk asked. Wouldn't miss it, Hayes said, then softer. My father's headstone is being updated too. From training accident to killed in action. Seems small, but it matters. It matters, Hawk agreed. They talked for another hour. About the trial. About Marcus Kane's cooperation and the evidence still being uncovered. About the 36 other operations Phantom Eagle had conducted before Benghazi, missions that were slowly being declassified, adding context and weight to a story the public was only beginning to understand. When Hayes finally left, she shook Hawk's hand with genuine warmth. Thank you, she said simply, for not giving up, for remembering them, for making sure their deaths meant something. After she drove away, Tyler and Hawk sat together on the porch steps, the metal box between them. Will you go, Tyler asked, to the ceremony? Hawk was quiet for a long moment. Then carefully, I don't know if I'll be alive next month. The words hung in the air like smoke. The doctors think I've got weeks, maybe a month if I'm lucky. The treatment they're offering might buy me a little more time, but at what cost? More sickness, more pain, more time in hospitals instead of here on this land with you. Grandpa, please. Listen to me, boy. Hawk turned to face his grandson. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of dying before I've said what needs to be said, before I've made sure you understand. Understand what? That you get to choose differently. Hawk's voice was intense now, urgent. Your father chose truth, chose to fight corruption even knowing it would get him killed. I chose survival, chose to run and hide and live with guilt. Both of us paid prices for those choices. But you, Tyler, you get to choose your own path, not mine, not his, yours. What if I don't know what that is? Then you have time to figure it out. Hawk smiled. You're 21 years old. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Don't waste it trying to avenge the dead or honor ghosts. Live. That's all any of us really wanted for you, just live. 2 weeks later, Sheriff Tom Briggs came to visit. He looked thinner than he had in Benghazi, the cancer doing its work on him too. But his eyes were clear and his handshake was firm. They sat in the barn, surrounded by tools and hay and the smell of horses, talking the way old soldiers talk when they know time is short. Got my own ceremony next week, Briggs said. County's giving me a commendation for the Benghazi operation, calling me a hero. You are a hero, Hawk said. I'm a dying man who got lucky, Briggs corrected, but I'll take the recognition. My wife deserves to see me honored, deserves to know I did something that mattered. We all did something that mattered, Hawk said. Yeah, Briggs was quiet for a moment. Question is, was it enough? Did we balance the scales, 4 decades of running, of hiding, of guilt? Does one operation make up for all of that? I don't know, Hawk admitted, but it's more than we had 6 months ago, more than Kane left us with. Briggs pulled a flask from his jacket, took a sip, offered it to Hawk. Against medical advice, he said with a grim smile. Hawk took a drink. The whiskey burned going down, warm and familiar. Everything's against medical advice at this point. How much time they give you? Month maybe. Same, Briggs took the flask back. Kind of fitting, isn't it? 2 old soldiers going out together, like we went in. Phantom Eagle rides again, Hawk said softly. They sat in silence, passing the flask, watching dust motes dance in the barn light. 2 men who'd outlived their time and made peace with the exit. When Briggs finally stood to leave, he gripped Hawk's shoulder. It was an honor, he said, serving with you, even if it was 40 years too late. Honor was mine, Hawk replied. 3 days later, Hawk got the call. Tom Briggs had collapsed at home. His wife had found him in the garage, working on an old truck he'd been restoring for years. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Massive heart attack. The cancer had spread to his heart. The doctors said he wouldn't have felt much pain. Just a moment of pressure, then nothing. Hawk sat with the phone in his hand for a long time after hanging up, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of another loss. Another friend gone. Another soldier who'd made it through the war only to fall in peacetime. Tyler found him an hour later, still sitting at the kitchen table. I heard, Tyler said quietly, I'm sorry. He was a good man. Hawk's voice was rough, better than he knew. The funeral's on Saturday. Want me to drive you? Hawk nodded. We owe him that much, both of us. The service was held in the small church where Briggs and his wife had been married 40 years ago. A simple building with white walls and tall windows that let in the Wyoming light. The church was packed. Fellow officers, veterans, friends, people whose lives had been touched by Tom Briggs' quiet decency and unwavering commitment to doing right. Hawk sat in the front row with Tyler and Mrs. Briggs, A woman whose grief was written in every line of her face but whose dignity never wavered. The pastor spoke about service, about sacrifice, about a man who'd worn the badge with honor and faced death with courage. But it was Mrs. Briggs who gave the eulogy that mattered. She stood at the pulpit, looking out at the gathered mourners, and spoke with a voice that trembled but never broke. Tom knew he was dying, she said, had known for 2 years. The doctors gave him 6 months. He gave them 24, and in those 2 years he did more living than most people do in a lifetime. She looked directly at Hawk. 3 months ago he came home from what he said was a fishing trip. Wouldn't tell me where he'd been, wouldn't tell me what he'd done, but I could see it in his eyes. He'd found something, peace maybe, or purpose, or just the knowledge that he'd stood up when it mattered. She smiled through her tears. He told me once near the end that a life measured in years doesn't mean much. It's the moments that count. The times you stood when you could have run. The times you spoke when you could have stayed silent. The times you fought when you could have surrendered. She looked at the flag-draped casket. My husband had a lot of those moments, and I'm proud of every single one. After the service, after the burial in the Veterans Cemetery where Tom Briggs was laid to rest with full honors, Hawk stood at the grave with Tyler. He saved my life in Benghazi, Tyler said quietly. When I froze, when I couldn't pull the trigger, he stepped in, put himself at risk for me. That's what good men do, Hawk replied. They protect others, even at cost to themselves. I never got to thank him. He knew. Hawk placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder. Trust me, he knew. They drove home in silence, both lost in their own thoughts, both feeling the weight of mortality pressing down. Back at the ranch, Hawk found an envelope in the mailbox. Hand addressed. No return address. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Tom Briggs in his sheriff's uniform, standing at attention, saluting, and a note in the sheriff's own handwriting. Hawk, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Wanted you to have this. Reminder that we finished what we started, that we stood when it mattered, that the last flight of Phantom Eagle was worth every mile. Tell Tyler he's got nothing to be ashamed of. Freezing in that moment doesn't make him weak. It makes him human. And humanity is what we were fighting for all along. Fair winds and following seas, old friend, Tom. Hawk read the note 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in the box where he kept his father's letters and his son's medals, and all the remnants of lives lived in service to something larger than themselves. That night, unable to sleep, Hawk walked out to the rifle range. The moon was full, bathing the valley in silver light. He sat up at the bench where he'd taught Tyler to shoot, where this whole journey had really begun. He loaded the Remington, chambered a round, looked through the scope at the 800-yard target barely visible in the moonlight. His hands were steady, his breathing even. The cancer pain was there, always there now, but manageable. He found his sight picture, adjusted for wind, for elevation, for all the variables that made the difference between hit and miss. And he took the shot. The crack echoed across the valley. 3 seconds later, the ping of metal on metal came back. Center mass. After all these years, after all the guilt and running and hiding, he could still make the shot. Hawk lowered the rifle and looked up at the stars, at the vast Wyoming sky that had sheltered him for 40 years, and felt something close to peace. He was ready. When Tyler came looking for him an hour later, worried by his absence, he found Hawk asleep on the bench, the rifle cradled in his arms like a child, a small smile on his weathered face. "Grandpa," Tyler said softly, touching his shoulder. Hawk's eyes opened. "Sorry, boy, didn't mean to worry you." "What are you doing out here?" Saying goodbye, Hawk sat up slowly, every joint protesting. To this, to the range, to the life I had here, getting my affairs in order. You're scaring me. Don't be scared. Hawk stood, gathering the rifle. I'm just being practical. The ceremony at Arlington is in 2 weeks. The doctors don't think I'll make it. Then we get you treatment. We do whatever it takes. Tyler, Hawk said gently, there is no whatever it takes. The cancer's everywhere. Liver, lungs, bones, I'm dying. And fighting it will just make the time I have left miserable instead of meaningful. So you're just giving up. I'm choosing how I go out, on my feet, on my land, with my grandson, not in some hospital bed hooked to machines, too drugged to know my own name. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. I'm not ready. I know, Hawk pulled his grandson close, but we rarely are for any of it. 1 week before the Arlington ceremony, David Chen arrived at the ranch. Condor looked older than he had in Benghazi, the years and the mission finally catching up with him, but his eyes were clear and his step was firm. He sat with Hawk on the porch as the sun set, 2 old soldiers watching the day fade into night. You're not going to make it to Arlington, Condor said. Not a question. No, Hawk shook his head. Don't have the strength. Doctor said I've got days, maybe a week. I could postpone it. Tell them you need more time. Don't, Hawk met his friend's eyes. Let them honor the dead. The living can wait. You earned those medals, Hawk. We both did, along with Falcon and the others, but they're just pieces of metal. What matters is we finished it. We brought Kane down. We told the truth. Condor was quiet for a long moment. What happens to me after you're gone? The last of Phantom Eagle. You keep living, Hawk said. Keep telling the story. Keep making sure people remember what happened. Not just in Benghazi, but in all those other places. All those other missions. The good and the bad. That's a heavy burden for one man. You've carried heavier for 40 years. True, Condor smiled slightly. I've been thinking about writing it all down. A book. The full story of Phantom Eagle. No more secrets, no more lies, just the truth. They'd classify it. Maybe, or maybe times have changed enough that people are ready to hear it. Ready to understand that the world isn't clean. That good men sometimes do dark things. And that carrying that weight is its own kind of service. If you write it, Hawk said, tell them about Falcon, about how he stood up. Tell them about Tom Briggs, about Sarah, about all the ones who paid the price for doing right. I will. And tell them, Hawk added quietly, that running doesn't make you a coward if you come back to fight. That hiding doesn't make you a traitor if you're protecting the truth. That survival can be its own kind of victory. Is that what you believe? It's what I need to believe. Hawk looked out at the mountains. Otherwise, the last 40 years were just waste. They weren't, Condor said firmly. You raised a good son. You're raising a good grandson. You kept the truth alive. And when the moment came, you stood. That's not waste. That's legacy. They sat together as the stars emerged. 2 survivors of a war that never ended. 2 ghosts who'd finally found their way home. In the morning, Condor left with a promise to return after the Arlington ceremony, to tell Hawk how it went, to share the speeches and the honors and the recognition that had been 42 years in coming. But 3 days later, at dawn on a Tuesday morning, James Maddox died in his sleep at the ranch in Wyoming. Tyler was with him, had been reading aloud from a book about forestry, about tree growth and soil composition, and the complex ecosystem of mountain wilderness. Hawk had fallen asleep listening to his grandson's voice, and sometime in the night, his breathing had simply stopped. Peaceful, painless, the way soldiers rarely get to go. The funeral was small, family, friends, fellow veterans who'd heard about Phantom Eagle and wanted to pay respects to one of the last. Marshal Hayes gave a eulogy. David Chen placed a black eagle pin on the coffin, the symbol of a unit that had finally been laid to rest. Tyler stood at the grave as they lowered his grandfather into Wyoming soil, next to his grandmother, not far from his father. 3 generations of Maddox men, together at last. He didn't cry, had cried all his tears in the days before. Now he just felt empty, and strangely beneath the grief something like peace. His grandfather had finished his mission, had found his redemption, had died knowing the truth was finally told and justice finally served. Not many men got that kind of closure. The ranch went to Tyler, along with a letter Hawk had written in his final weeks. Tyler read it alone that night, sitting on the porch where he'd learned to shoot, where he'd heard the truth about Phantom Eagle, where his life had changed forever. The letter was simple, direct, written in his grandfather's careful script. Tyler, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Try not to grieve too long. I lived a full life, longer than I had any right to expect. Got to see you grow into a good man. Got to finish what I started 42 years ago. That's more than most soldiers get. The ranch is yours now. You can keep it, sell it. Do whatever feels right. Your father loved this land, I loved this land, but you're not us. You get to choose your own path. Whatever you choose, know that I'm proud of you. Know that your father would be proud. Know that the legacy you carry isn't about rifles or revenge or the darkness we lived in. It's about doing what's right, standing up when it matters, telling the truth even when it's hard. That's what Phantom Eagle should have been about from the start. Not the killing, not the secrets, but the principle. The idea that some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. Live well, Tyler. Live honestly. Live without the weight I carried for so many years. You're free now, we all are. I love you, boy. Always have, always will. Grandpa. Tyler folded the letter carefully, placed it in the box with his father's letters and his grandfather's medals, and the photograph of 5 young men who'd believed they were invincible. Then he walked out to the rifle range, carrying Hawk's Remington 700, and set up at the bench where he'd fired his first perfect shot. 800 yards, the target shimmering in the late afternoon light, wind from the west at maybe 5 miles per hour, temperature dropping as the sun descended. He settled into position, felt the rifle's familiar weight, heard his grandfather's voice in his memory. Steady breath, steady hand, then squeeze. Tyler breath, steadied, squeezed. The shot cracked across the valley. 3 seconds later, the metallic ping echoed back. Dead center. He smiled, set the rifle down carefully, and as the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the land in shades of gold and amber, Tyler Maddox made a choice. He would keep the ranch, keep the legacy, but he'd transform it into something new, something that honored the past without being trapped by it. A place where veterans could come to heal, to learn new skills, to find peace in wide open spaces far from the wars that had broken them. A place where the lessons of Phantom Eagle, the real lessons about honor and sacrifice and truth, could live on. Not in shadows, not in secrets, but in daylight. 6 months later, the first group of veterans arrived. 8 men and women struggling with PTSD, with physical wounds, with the weight of wars that never seemed to end. Tyler met them at the gate, showed them the land, the horses, the mountains stretching endless and clean. Marshal Hayes came to visit that first week, brought her father's flag, asked if they could fly it at the ranch entrance. Tyler agreed. They raised it together as the sun rose, the stars and stripes snapping in the morning wind. Condor came too, not to stay but to see, to walk the land where Hawk had lived and died, to pay respects one final time before heading back to whatever life he'd built in the shadows. The book he'd written about Phantom Eagle had been published 2 months earlier, a bestseller. The full story, unclassified after intense legal battles, laying bare 40 years of secrets and lies and the cost of choices made in darkness. "This is good," Condor said, standing on the porch where Hawk had stood. "Your grandfather would approve." "You think?" "I know," Condor smiled. "He spent 40 years running from who he was. You're spending your life running toward who you want to be. That's the difference. That's the legacy." Before Condor left, he handed Tyler a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" "Something I've been holding onto. Thought now was the right time." Tyler unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a black eagle pin, the original, the one that had belonged to Hawk when Phantom Eagle was still operational. "He wanted you to have this," Condor said. "Told me so before he died. Said if you ever decide to carry the name, carry it with honor. But if you choose differently, that's fine too. The pin doesn't make the man. The man makes the pin mean something." Tyler held the pin, feeling its weight, feeling the history. "I'll keep it," he said, "as a reminder, but not as a burden." Condor nodded. That's exactly what he hoped you'd say. That night, Tyler sat alone on the porch, watching stars emerge one by one across the massive sky. Somewhere out there, his father and grandfather and all the ghosts of Phantom Eagle were finally at rest. And here in this place they'd loved, their legacy lived on. Not in violence, not in secrets, not in the darkness that had consumed them, but in healing, in truth, in the simple act of helping broken warriors find their way home. A vehicle pulled up the drive, an old pickup. A man climbed out, maybe 30 years old, moving with the stiff gait of someone who'd been injured badly and healed badly. He approached the porch slowly. "This the place?" he asked. "The Veteran Healing Center?" "This is it," Tyler replied. "I'm Marcus." The man shifted uncomfortably. "Marcus Kane, not sure if that name means anything to you." Tyler stood, "Kane's son." "Yeah," Kane looked at the ground. "I understand if you want me to leave. After everything my father did, everything I helped him do before I knew." Tyler was quiet for a moment. Then he gestured to a chair. "Sit." Kane sat cautiously. "You testified against him," Tyler said. "Helped put him away. Gave up your freedom to tell the truth." "Least I could do." "My grandfather used to say that redemption isn't about forgetting the past. It's about not letting the past define the future." Tyler met Kane's eyes. "You're not your father. You don't have to carry his sins." Kane's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. The program here, it's for people trying to find a new path. Sounds like that's what you need." "It is." "Then you're welcome." Tyler extended his hand. "Welcome home." They shook, two men born into darkness, choosing to walk toward light. As more vehicles arrived, more veterans seeking peace, Tyler looked up at the stars and whispered to the wind. "We did it, Grandpa. We broke the cycle." And somewhere in the vast Wyoming night, carried on wind that smelled of sage and snow and the promise of tomorrow, a voice that sounded like James Maddox whispered back, "Proud of you, boy, so proud." The last eagle had flown, but the sky remained open. And somewhere in the distance, if you listened carefully on quiet nights, you could hear the wind carrying voices. Steady breath, steady hand. And the future, stretching bright and unburdened before those brave enough to reach for it. This story hit me harder than I expected while researching it. James Hawk spent 42 years carrying guilt that wasn't entirely his to carry. How many of our fathers and grandfathers came home from wars they couldn't talk about, carried weight they never put down? The part that gets me, Tyler choosing not to pull that trigger, breaking the cycle, that's the real victory. I'd love to hear from you veterans out there. Did you have a moment like Hawk's? A choice that haunted you? Drop a comment, your stories matter. And if this one resonated, there's more coming. Hit subscribe.